Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. It started the way a lot of dumb things start, with us driving around with no plan. Back roads, late at night, music too loud to think. There were 4 of us crammed into my old sedan, the heat barely working, windows fogging up every few minutes. We were just bored, restless, and too wired to call it a night. Someone suggested we try to find that stretch of road that locals said led nowhere, the one kids in high school always swore was haunted. I had never seen it myself, and honestly I thought it was just one of those small-town myths that gets passed around because everyone needs something to talk about. But the gas tank was half full, and no one was ready to head home, so we started taking turns at random, just pushing further and further off the main road. The deeper we went, the fewer houses we saw. Streetlights disappeared. Eventually it was just forest pressing in close on either side, branches clawing at the car like they wanted to keep us from turning back. It was past midnight when we saw the barn. At first I thought it was just another collapsing structure, one of those old farm buildings that had not been touched in decades. The roof sagged in the middle, the wood siding looked weather-beaten, and weeds had grown up to the windowsills. But then we noticed the light. A faint orange glow leaked out through the gaps in the boards, flickering like fire. We pulled over without even talking about it. The road was narrow, just wide enough for one car, so we parked half on the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. The air was colder when we stepped out, sharp enough that I felt it sting in my lungs. The woods around us were silent in a way that felt wrong, like the usual background hum of insects and night creatures had just been switched off. One of my friends laughed nervously, said it had to be squatters or maybe kids messing around with candles. But when we got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The glow was not random. The candles were arranged in a pattern, evenly spaced along the inside walls. Through one crack in the wood, I could see them lined up like soldiers, stretching all the way to the far end of the barn. We should have turned back right there. Honestly, everything in me was screaming that this was not ours to see. But the 4 of us were stuck in that stubborn mix of fear and curiosity, the same thing that makes you peek through your fingers during a horror movie. My best friend pushed at the door and it gave way with a low groan, swinging open just enough for us to slip inside. The smell hit me first. Wax, smoke, and something sour underneath, like rot. The dirt floor was uneven, pocked with holes, and the candlelight threw long shadows that danced across the walls. That was when we saw the carvings. Every beam, every plank had been marked. Some of the symbols were just shallow scratches, others gouged deep like whoever had made them wanted the marks to last forever. Circles intersecting with lines, jagged shapes that hurt to look at too long, patterns that felt too deliberate to be random but made no sense. Then there were the bones. Small piles of them tucked into corners, some tied together with string, some scattered loose. A rib cage here, a skull there. Most of them clearly animal, but a few I did not want to think about too hard. I remember whispering something like, "We should go," but the words came out so soft I do not think anyone heard me. The air felt heavy, like even speaking too loud would draw something's attention. We just stood there, trying to take it in, the silence stretching until it hurt. And then the voices came. At first I thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer, rhythmic. A low murmur that rose and fell in waves. It was not English. It was not anything I recognized. Chanting, multiple voices in unison, moving closer. My chest went tight. I could not breathe right, could not get my legs to move. One of my friends grabbed my arm and hissed that we had to hide. The barn had a loft, half collapsed, with a ladder leaning crooked against the wall. We scrambled up, trying not to make the boards creak, pressing ourselves into the shadows as the voices grew louder. I remember lying there on my stomach, splinters digging into my palms, staring down at the open space below. The candlelight flickered against the walls, the carvings seemed to shift in the shadows, and the piles of bones looked fresh in that sick orange glow. The chanting grew steady, deliberate, and then the door creaked open wider. Figures slipped inside, one after another, hooded, cloaked, their faces hidden. There were at least half a dozen of them, maybe more, their voices blending into that same horrible rhythm that seemed to shake the air itself. And they were dragging something with them. I could not see what it was at first. It was long, wrapped in a dark tarp, edges stained with something darker. They laid it down in the center of the barn, right in the middle of the carved floor. I felt my stomach twist. My dog back home would bark at shadows sometimes, and I always thought it was nothing. But in that moment, crouched in a rotting loft above strangers chanting over a body-shaped bundle, I understood what real fear was, the kind that leaves you frozen, praying you are invisible. The figures formed a circle around the tarp. Their voices rose, louder now, echoing in the rafters. One of them stepped forward, holding something sharp that caught the candlelight. My friend beside me whimpered and slapped a hand over her mouth. I dug my nails into the wood, begging silently for her to stay quiet. And then, as if the sound carried, one of the hooded figures paused, their head tilted back, slow, deliberate, until they were staring straight up at the loft. I swear to God we had not moved, not a creak, not a whisper, but that figure's face, hidden in the hood, turned directly toward us. That was when I knew we were not just intruding. We had been expected. The figure never moved at first. They just kept staring up at us like they could see right through the shadows where we were pressed flat. The hood concealed the face, but I swear I felt their eyes lock onto mine. My skin crawled, the back of my neck tingled, and every nerve screamed to bolt, to jump out of that loft and sprint into the trees. But my legs would not move. One of my friends whispered something, just a shaky syllable, and the sound seemed to echo too loud in the barn. The chanting faltered. One by one, the other figures turned their heads upward. It was not like they were surprised or even annoyed. It was worse. They turned with this awful slowness, like they were all following a cue, like they had been waiting for the exact moment to acknowledge us. We flattened down harder against the rotting boards, trying to make ourselves invisible. My heart was hammering so loud I thought it would give us away. My mouth was bone dry, lips stuck to my teeth. I wanted to tell the others not to move, not to breathe, but my voice was gone. The chanting stopped completely. The barn fell into silence, except for the hiss of candle flames and the sound of something dripping from that tarp in the middle of the floor. The smell of iron hit me then, sharp and nauseating, and I realized whatever was wrapped inside was not just an object. The figure who had first looked up took a step backward, then raised an arm. Their sleeve fell back just enough to show skin, pale and thin, etched with the same symbols carved into the walls. They pointed, not just upward at the loft, directly at me. I felt my stomach drop. My whole body buzzed with panic, but still I could not move. It was like the pointing itself held me there, nailed me to the spot. My friend beside me stifled a sob, clutching my arm so tightly I could feel her nails break skin. Then, without a word, the group went back to the bundle. The figure lowered their arm, the others bent down, and the chanting started again, louder this time, vibrating through the floorboards under me. The sound was so low it rattled my ribs, made my teeth ache. We could not watch anymore, we had to get out. I gestured frantically to the others, mouthing that we needed to move while their attention was on whatever was in that tarp. My best friend shook his head, but I did not give him a choice. I started inching backward toward the ladder, careful not to let the old wood creak. Every movement felt like it took an hour. When I finally reached the edge, I glanced down. The ladder was crooked, one rung cracked, but it was our only chance. I slid down as quietly as I could, boots hitting the dirt with barely a sound. The others followed, one by one, pale faces slick with sweat, hands shaking. The barn door was only a few steps away. I swear I could feel the night air leaking through the cracks, cool and sharp. We moved in silence, slow and careful, but halfway there, my dog barked. It was not even a loud bark, more of a sharp yelp, but it cut through the chanting like a gunshot. The voices stopped. Every hooded head turned toward us again. This time there was no pretending. They had us. We bolted. I do not even remember making the decision. My legs just finally obeyed and we ran, the barn door slamming against the wall as we shoved through it. The cold night air hit my face like a slap, and for a second I thought we might actually make it. Then the footsteps started behind us. Not running, not pounding, just a steady rhythm, perfectly in sync, multiple sets all moving together, the sound of deliberate pursuit. The whistling of breath through cloth hoods carried after us, a horrible hiss that seemed too close no matter how fast we ran. Branches tore at my arms, the ground snagged my boots, but I did not stop. None of us did. The car was only a short distance down the road, parked crooked on the shoulder. I could see its dull shine between the trees, and I pushed harder, lungs burning, throat raw. We reached it in what felt like hours but could not have been more than a minute. I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropped them, hands slick with sweat. My friends shoved at me, screaming to hurry. When the locks finally clicked open, we piled inside in a scramble of limbs and curses. I jammed the key into the ignition. For one horrifying second, the engine just sputtered. My heart plummeted, certain this was it. Then it roared to life, headlights flashing against the trees. And that was when we saw them. The hooded figures stood at the tree line, perfectly still. There were more of them now, at least a dozen, maybe more, faces hidden, robes shifting in the breeze. They did not chase us. They did not lunge. They just stood there, lined up like a wall of shadow, watching. I floored it. Gravel sprayed, the car fishtailed, but we got onto the road and tore away. No one spoke, no one even breathed too loud. The road seemed endless, the headlights catching nothing but the same narrow stretch of asphalt and black forest. When we finally reached the main highway, the tension broke all at once. My friend in the passenger seat was crying openly, chest heaving. Another sat curled against the window, whispering that we should never have stopped, never have gone inside. I kept my hands locked on the wheel, staring dead ahead, because I knew if I looked into the rearview mirror and saw even one of those hoods behind us, I would lose control completely. We drove until the sun started to rise, not stopping until we hit a gas station with lights that felt like salvation. None of us could eat. We just sat in the parking lot, letting the warmth of daylight sink in, trying to convince ourselves it was over. But deep down, I knew it was not. The barn was still there. The symbols, the bones, the hooded figures, they had let us go. That was the part I could not shake. They had seen us. They had pointed at me, and yet we were here, breathing, alive. Which meant they had not been finished. The gas station should have felt like safety. Bright fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the hum of refrigerators in the back, the cashier scrolling on his phone like nothing in the world was wrong, normal, ordinary. But even sitting there in the car with the engine cooling, doors locked, and the first stretch of daylight spreading across the sky, I could not shake the feeling that the night was still clinging to us. None of us spoke for a while. My hands were still locked on the steering wheel, even though the car was off. My friend in the passenger seat had her head buried in her hands, rocking slightly. The other two were pressed back against their doors like the extra inches of distance between us might somehow matter. The air in the car felt thick, sour with fear and sweat, and nobody wanted to break it by being the first to speak. Eventually, one of them did. He whispered that we needed to go to the police. At first it sounded like sense, the first real plan we had since bolting out of that barn, but even as he said it, I knew it would not work. How do you tell someone what we saw? A barn full of candles, symbols, bones, chanting figures dragging God knows what in a tarp. They would call us liars, or drunk. Or worse, They would decide to check it out themselves, and those hooded people would not be as patient with outsiders a second time. We went inside the gas station anyway, mostly because none of us could bear to sit in that car any longer. The cashier barely looked up, just mumbled a greeting while we stumbled toward the back cooler for bottled water. I caught our reflections in the glass door, pale faces, wide eyes, and realized we looked exactly like the kind of people who had seen something they should not have. I remember drinking that water like it was the only thing keeping me alive. My throat hurt from running, from choking down panic, but the cold liquid did not settle me the way I thought it would. If anything, it made me more aware of the knot in my stomach, the way my whole body was still braced like something might lunge at us any second. On the way out, I noticed something that made me stop. There was a community bulletin board by the door, the kind where people post flyers for yard sales or missing pets. Right in the center was a piece of paper with one of those same symbols we had seen carved into the barn walls. No explanation, no words, just the jagged design scrawled in black marker. I froze. My friends bumped into me, asked what I was staring at. I could not even form the words to explain. I just tore the paper off the board, crumpled it into my fist, and shoved it into my pocket. The cashier looked up finally, gave me this half smile that did not reach his eyes, and I swear my blood ran cold. We got back into the car and drove in silence. No music, no jokes, not even nervous laughter. Just the sound of the tires humming against the pavement and the occasional sharp breath from one of us trying not to cry. The sky grew brighter, the world around us returning to its usual rhythm, but it felt wrong. Like we had slipped back into normal life, but normal life no longer wanted us. I dropped everyone off one by one. No hugs, no see you laters, not even promises to talk about it later. We just avoided each other's eyes and muttered quick thanks before slipping out into our separate houses. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, it felt like weeks had passed instead of hours. Walking into my house should have been a relief. It was familiar. My dog was waiting at the door, tail wagging, nails clicking against the floor. I let out this shaky laugh as I crouched to pet him, trying to convince myself it was over. Just one horrible night. Just one story we would eventually bury and pretend never happened. But when I stepped into the kitchen, my heart dropped. On the table was a sheet of paper, plain white, like something pulled from a printer, and on it, drawn in the same jagged lines, was another symbol, the exact same one I had ripped down at the gas station bulletin board. I stood there frozen, my dog whining at my side, staring at that paper until my vision blurred. My first thought was that one of my friends had slipped it there as a sick joke, but the house had been locked, my keys had never left my pocket, and none of them had followed me home. I crumpled it, shoved it deep into the trash, but my hands would not stop shaking. I checked every door, every window, every closet, but nothing was disturbed. Still, I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to stretch too long. Around 3 a.m, I woke to my dog growling low at the hallway, ears pricked, fur bristling. I whispered his name, tried to calm him, but he would not look away from the dark stretch of floor outside my bedroom. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it down the hall. Nothing. Just the same framed pictures on the wall, the same clutter by the closet door. But the dog kept growling, low and steady, like he could sense something I could not. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under again, but it was not restful. My dreams were filled with chanting, with candles flickering against wood, with hooded figures raising their heads to stare directly at me. I woke soaked in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs. The next morning, there was another piece of paper on the kitchen table. This time, it was not a symbol. It was a drawing, crude, childlike, but unmistakable. 4 figures standing in a loft, wide eyes staring down at a circle of hooded people below. It was us. That was the moment I realized leaving the barn had not meant leaving it behind. I sat at the table for a long time staring at that drawing. It was crude, shaky lines and uneven proportions, but it was too specific to be random. 4 figures crouched in the loft, watching. The circle of hooded people below. Even the tarp in the middle of the barn had been drawn in, just a rough rectangle with dark lines leaking out from underneath. Whoever had left that paper in my house knew exactly what we had seen. I thought about calling one of my friends, but my phone just sat heavy in my hand. What was I supposed to say? That something had broken into my house and left a picture of us? That the same group we had watched in that barn was now following me home? It sounded insane. And besides, what if I told them and they had not found anything strange in their own homes? Then it would just be me carrying this, me sounding paranoid. So I did nothing. That day dragged by. Every normal task felt pointless, like I was moving through someone else's routine. I made coffee, but it went cold on the counter. I turned on the television, but could not follow what was happening on the screen. The dog shadowed me everywhere, ears twitching, eyes fixed on corners like he was waiting for something to emerge. By evening, I could not take it anymore. I drove over to my best friend's house. The second he opened the door and saw me, he looked like he had been expecting it. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and before I could even ask, he said he had found something too. On his kitchen counter that morning had been a small pile of bones. Tiny, delicate, still flecked with something dark. He swore his house had been locked all night, swore he lived alone. But they had been there waiting for him when he woke. We sat in his living room and compared notes. The flyer I had torn from the gas station, the drawing left on my table, the bones in his house. It was not random, not a prank, not a coincidence. Someone had marked us, and now they were letting us know that we were still being watched. The worst part was we could not figure out how. No broken windows, no forced doors, just things appearing inside our homes as though they had always been there. We tossed around theories until our throats were dry. Maybe the hooded people had followed us back in cars we had not noticed. Maybe there was more than one group, or maybe it was something less human altogether. The possibilities only made the silence heavier. By the time I drove home, I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My neighborhood looked the same as always. Kids' bikes left in front yards, porch lights glowing warm in the dusk. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw something that froze me. On my front door, carved deep into the wood, was another symbol. The same jagged lines I had seen scratched into the barn walls. This one was fresh. The edges were splintered, the cuts clean, and tiny curls of wood still clung to the door frame. I backed away, heart pounding, the dog barking wildly from inside. My first thought was to call the police. My second was that it would not matter. What would they do? Take a report, maybe dust for fingerprints, and then leave me alone in that house again. And whoever had carved that symbol would know I had tried to involve outsiders. I went inside anyway because I had no choice. I locked every door, shoved furniture in front of the back entrance, and kept every light on. The house glowed like a beacon, and still I felt like the shadows pressed closer. My dog would not stop pacing. Every few minutes he stopped at the hallway and growled, low and steady. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, by pacing, by scrolling through my phone, but none of it worked. Around midnight, I gave up and sat in the living room with the television on mute, just waiting for something to happen. My eyelids grew heavy, my body exhausted, but the tension kept me from falling all the way asleep. At some point, the static sound of the muted television shifted. I looked up and froze. The screen was no longer blank. It was showing footage of me. Not live footage. Old. From the barn. I watched myself climb the ladder into the loft, the camera angle set from the ground. I watched the others creep after me, the hooded figures shuffling into the circle below. The video played like someone had been filming us that entire time. My hands shook as I scrambled for the remote, but no matter what button I pressed, the footage kept playing. The chanting started faintly through the speakers even though the volume was still muted. That low, vibrating rhythm that had haunted my dreams since that night. My dog barked furiously, snapping at the television, but the sound only grew louder until it filled the room. I shut off the power at the wall, yanked the cord, and the screen finally went black. The sound cut off instantly. My chest heaved as I dropped the remote, my whole body trembling. I wanted to run, to leave everything behind and never look back, but I knew it would not matter. I had already tried leaving that barn behind, and it had followed me anyway. There was no road far enough, no lock strong enough. They had carved into my door, left drawings on my table, played their voices in my house. They wanted me to know I was trapped. When I finally crawled into bed that night, I left every light blazing. My dog curled tight against me, ears twitching, body stiff. Sleep came in broken stretches, filled with shadows moving at the edges of my vision. And then, at 3 a.m. sharp, I woke to the sound of whispering. It was not outside, not in the hallway. It was in my bedroom. I lay there frozen, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to that low murmur that rose and fell in the same rhythm as the chanting. My throat was too tight to scream. The dog growled once and then went silent, tail tucked between his legs as he pressed closer to me. When I finally forced myself to look, I saw it. A shadow stretched up the wall, impossibly tall, the shape of a hooded figure bending over my bed. I blinked hard, desperate for it to vanish like a trick of the light. But it did not. It just stayed there, watching, waiting, and when I jerked upright, ready to run, the shadow melted into the wall and was gone. But the whispering lingered. The next day I could not face going to work. I called in sick with some half excuse about food poisoning and spent the morning wandering my house like a stranger. Every sound set me on edge. The rustle of leaves outside. Each noise felt. I tried to convince myself that the shadow in my room had been nothing more than exhaustion, some waking dream fueled by stress and fear. But when I opened the trash to throw away the crumpled drawing from the night before, it was not there. The bag was empty. Not just the drawing, but every scrap of garbage I had thrown away. Gone. Like the whole bag had been lifted out in the middle of the night without a sound. I texted my best friend, the only one I trusted enough to tell the full truth to. He did not respond. I called twice, straight to voicemail. By afternoon I was pacing in circles, debating whether to drive over and check on him. Eventually the thought of sitting alone in my house another second was worse than the risk of looking crazy, so I grabbed my keys and left. His car was in the driveway. The blinds were drawn, the porch light still on even though it was midday. I knocked once, then again louder, then finally just turned the knob. The door swung open. Inside was dark, all the curtains pulled tight. The air smelled wrong, like damp earth and burnt wax. My shoes crunched on something as I stepped in, and when I looked down I saw the floor littered with crayon drawings, dozens of them, scattered across the living room. Symbols, rough stick figures, circles with black smears in the center. I called his name, voice cracking, but only silence answered. My stomach twisted. I crouched to pick up one of the drawings and my blood ran cold. It was me, not a stick figure that could be anyone. It was my face, crude but recognizable, and the figure beside me was hooded, looming. I dropped it and bolted down the hall, calling his name again, louder this time. A door creaked open ahead, and for one insane moment, I thought it was him, that he would step out and laugh at me for panicking. But what stepped into the hallway was not him. It was a figure in a dark robe, hood pulled low, face hidden in shadow. It stood there silently, blocking the hall. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. My first thought was to run, but another figure stepped into view at the other end of the hallway, and then another, emerging from the kitchen. I was surrounded. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. My vision blurred at the edges, black creeping in, and a sound rose in the room, the chanting. Low, guttural, the same rhythm I had heard in the barn. My knees buckled. My body screamed to run, but my legs would not obey. One of the figures lifted a hand and pointed at me, the same way they had in the barn loft. That simple gesture rooted me in place, paralyzed by some force I could not understand. My throat was dry, words stuck there, and all I could do was stand shaking while the sound grew louder and louder until it rattled my bones. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, just gone. The hallway empty, the kitchen silent, the drawings on the floor the only proof I had not lost my mind entirely. I stumbled out of that house and into the daylight, gasping like I had surfaced from drowning. I drove home in a blur, barely able to keep the car steady on the road. My dog barked when I walked through the door, tail low, body stiff, as though he could smell the fear radiating off me. That night, I could not bring myself to turn the lights off. Every lamp in the house burned, and still the shadows seemed to twitch at the corners of my eyes. I sat on the couch clutching a baseball bat, too tired to move, too scared to sleep. Around midnight my phone buzzed, a new text from an unknown number. Just one sentence. "We see you." I nearly dropped the phone. My hands shook as I typed back, demanding to know who it was. No reply, just silence. I threw the phone across the room, but the sound of it hitting the wall did nothing to ease the terror crawling under my skin. I sat there frozen for what felt like hours until the dog started growling at the window. I forced myself to look. Outside, in the yard, stood a line of figures, hooded, still, watching. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again, but they were gone. The yard was empty. The night air was still, but the dog kept growling, pacing, nails clicking against the floor. At that point, I knew this was not about the barn anymore. The barn had just been where we had stumbled into their world. Now their world had bled into mine, and I did not know how to stop it. By dawn, I had made a decision. I could not stay in the house another night. I packed a bag, shoved it into the trunk, and drove with no destination. I told myself maybe if I moved far enough, if I left behind everything that tied me to this place, I could slip away from them. But when I stopped for gas 2 towns over, I saw it again. On the pump, scratched deep into the metal, was the same jagged symbol. My knees nearly buckled when I saw it, and I had to grip the pump to steady myself. I realized then that it did not matter how far I drove. They had marked me. Wherever I went, they would be waiting. That night, I stayed at a motel off the highway. The room was dingy. The sheets smelled like mildew, but I did not care. I shoved a chair under the doorknob, kept the television on low, and tried to convince myself I could get even an hour of rest. I dreamed of the barn again. But this time, I was not in the loft. I was in the circle, hood pulled over my head, chanting words I did not understand. And above me, in the loft, I could see someone else crouching, wide-eyed, staring down. When I woke, there was a piece of paper slipped under the motel door. I picked it up with shaking hands. On it was a drawing, the same crude lines, the same rough proportions. This time, it showed me standing outside a motel door, hooded figures surrounding me. I dropped it like it had burned me. I do not think I slept more than 10 minutes at a time that night in the motel. My body would shut down for a few minutes, then snap back awake at the smallest creak, my heart hammering like it expected to see the figures standing over me. The crumpled paper with that drawing of me outside the motel door stayed on the carpet where I had dropped it. I could not bring myself to pick it up again. The air in the room felt stale, suffocating, like the place had been sealed shut for years. I kept the television on a low murmur, some old infomercial selling knives, just so the silence would not swallow me whole. My dog, who had always been my comfort in dark nights, refused to sleep. He sat upright by the door, ears twitching, a low growl rumbling every time the pipes knocked in the walls. I envied his courage. I felt hollowed out, a shell just waiting for something to fill it. By the time daylight broke through the thin curtains, I was already dressed, my bag packed. I drove with no direction again, just pushing miles between me and the places that had already been marked. But there was no outrunning the thought that gnawed at me. It was not the barn they were tied to. It was us. It was me. I stopped at a diner in the next county, forcing myself to eat something, though each bite sat like lead in my stomach. The waitress gave me a smile that should have been comforting, but her eyes lingered too long. When she brought the check, I froze. On the receipt, where the tip line should have been, was another jagged symbol. No words, no numbers, just that crude scrawl. I left cash on the table and walked out without another word. My legs felt like they were carrying me through water. The sun was high. Traffic rolled steady along the highway. People chatted and laughed in the parking lot. But to me it all looked wrong, like I was walking through a stage set. Like at any moment the background would fall away and reveal the circle of hooded figures waiting just behind it. That was when I stopped pretending I could outrun it. I turned the car around and drove back. Not to the barn. I was not stupid enough to walk into their hands again, but back toward the town, back to my own house. My hands were shaking so badly on the steering wheel that I had to pull over twice, but some pull, some inevitability, told me I had to stop running. When I got home, everything was exactly as I had left it. Front door locked, curtains drawn, not a thing out of place. But inside, on my kitchen table, was a single candle. White wax, burned low, a dark puddle congealed around the base. I knew it had not been there before. I had not owned candles like that. I sat down across from it and stared until my eyes blurred. My dog paced in frantic circles, whining, nails scraping the tile. I wanted to run again. Every part of me screamed to leave, but I stayed. For once, I stayed. As the sun went down, I lit it. My hands were trembling so hard I nearly dropped the match. The wick caught instantly, flame burning steady, and I waited. The house fell into a strange silence, like the world outside had folded away. My chest tightened, my throat dry, and then I heard it. The chanting, not outside this time, not on a recording, inside the room with me, low, rhythmic, vibrating against the walls. The flame on the candle flickered, though there was no breeze. Shadows crawled long across the kitchen, bending, twisting, taking shapes that were not natural. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Instead, I forced myself to whisper, "What do you want from me?" The shadows swelled, stretching tall, hooded outlines rising from the edges of the room. The chanting grew louder. My vision shook, my whole body vibrating with it. And then, clear and separate from the chorus, a single voice answered. You watched. That was it. Just those two words. Simple, final. And in that moment I understood. It was never about the barn, or the symbols, or the bones. It was about us being in that loft, watching what we should never have seen. We had become part of it simply by being there. Witnesses were not supposed to walk away. I do not remember blowing out the candle. One moment the flame was there, shadows writhing, sound crushing me. The next it was dark, silent, empty. The candle was gone, the table bare. For the first time in weeks I slept through the night. No shadows at the door, no drawings on the table, no chanting in the walls, just silence. The next morning I went to check on my friend, the one I had seen surrounded in his own hallway. His house was empty. The blinds drawn, the floors bare, every trace of him gone. No furniture, no clothes, not even the drawings that had littered the floor, like no one had lived there in years. I asked the neighbors, but they looked at me like I was crazy. One woman swore the house had been vacant for months. Another said she thought it was condemned. My throat went tight, my stomach cold. I had been in that house days ago. I had spoken to him. I had seen him. I drove home, my head swimming, my body heavy. When I pulled into my driveway, my dog barked once, sharp and urgent, then went silent. On the front door, carved into the wood just above the handle, was a new symbol, different from the others. This one looked like an eye. I stood there staring at it for what felt like an eternity. My legs shook, my chest ached, my throat was dry, and then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I finally understood. They did not need to chase me anymore. They did not need to leave drawings or bones or shadows. Because once you have seen them, once you have heard the chanting and watched the hooded circle, you carry it inside you. There is no outrunning that, no hiding, no forgetting. It has been weeks now. Nothing new has appeared in my house. No chanting, no drawings, no shadows creeping at the edge of my vision. To anyone else, it would look like life is back to normal. But every night when I lie in bed, I feel it. The silence is too thick, the air too still. And in that silence, I know they are still watching. Not outside the window, not in the hallway, not crouched in the attic. Inside, and I cannot shake the feeling that the next time I hear that chanting, it will not be outside of me at all. It will be my own voice, joining in. This is one of those stories I almost didn't tell. Even now, I feel weird writing it down. Not because I'm afraid of sounding crazy, though, yeah, there's some of that, but mostly because part of me still thinks maybe it was someone else. That I saw what I wanted to see, or didn't want to see, depending on how you look at it. But I know what I saw. I just don't know what it means. It started 2 Saturdays ago, just before 9 in the morning. I remember that because I had slept in for once and was walking down to the corner deli to get a coffee and maybe one of those awful but comforting egg sandwiches they keep in the foil wraps. It was gray out. The kind of overcast that makes everything feel like it's happening a little underwater. Still cool from the night. Barely any wind. I had just rounded the corner near the intersection on 37th and noticed someone at the bus stop across the street. Older guy, grayish hair, big shoulders. Worn brown jacket with one side a little longer than the other, like it had been tugged down too many times. It took me a second, but something about the way he shifted his weight triggered this deep, bone-level recognition. The limp. It was subtle, more like a favoring of one side, but I'd seen that walk 1,000 times. My dad used to do that exact same shuffle. He injured his hip doing construction when I was a kid, and never really fixed it. Said it made him look distinguished. Said it gave him a little character. That was his phrase. So I stopped walking. This guy, the one at the bus stop, turned slightly, and I swear to you, I almost called out, because it wasn't just the limp, it was his face. My dad's face. Not someone who looked like him, not someone in the same age range or body type. I mean the exact face. The same sun-weathered skin. The same way his jaw clenched when he was thinking. Even the thinning spot at the crown of his head, it was like seeing a ghost, except he wasn't glowing or floating or anything. He was just standing there, real, solid, breathing. I stood half hidden behind a parked van for maybe 30 seconds, trying to make sense of it. My heart was pounding, but I didn't move. I didn't even think to pull out my phone. I just stared. Then he turned his head, and our eyes met. And that's when the bottom dropped out of it. His left eye looked fine, brown, sharp, just like I remembered. But the right one, the one that always squinted more than the other when he smiled, it didn't move. It didn't focus. It looked like glass. like it had been set in, not grown there. The skin around it didn't match either, too smooth, almost like it had been pulled tight and fitted wrong. He didn't smile, he didn't wave, he didn't speak. He just looked at me like I was the one who was out of place, like I should have known this moment was coming. Then the bus pulled up. He boarded without a word, no glance back. I stood there long enough for the second bus to come and go. I didn't even get the coffee. When I finally made it home, I sat on the edge of my bed for almost an hour, trying to figure out what to do. Should I tell someone? A friend? A doctor? Was it even real? Could someone have found a photo of my dad and made a mask? But why? He wasn't famous. He was just a guy, a construction worker from Queens who passed away from a heart issue 5 years ago. Closed casket. I was there. I spoke at the funeral. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that glassy eye, the way it didn't blink, the way his face didn't quite move right when he turned. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came the next morning. When I opened my apartment door, there was a photograph on the floor. Just one. No envelope, no note. It was a printed photo, like the kind you get from a disposable camera or an old film roll. Matte finish, sharp colors. It was me, sleeping. I was on my side, in my bed, the covers pulled up to my chest. The angle was from the doorway, like whoever took it was standing just inside my room. You could see the back of my nightstand, the corner of the closet. It was definitely my apartment. But that's not all. In the photo, there was a hand. Just one. In the bottom right corner, out of focus, but visible, reaching slightly toward the edge of the bed. And I swear to you, it was his hand. Same thick fingers, same worn skin, the exact way my dad's knuckles bent when he reached for something. I dropped the photo, backed away from it like it might bite. Then I locked the door, deadbolt and chain. I didn't leave my apartment the rest of the day. I kept the lights on, even though it was bright out. I went through every closet, every cabinet. I checked the windows. I checked under the bed. Nothing. Nothing that said anyone had been there. The place looked exactly like it always did. But I knew something had changed. Someone had been inside, and they wanted me to know they had been close enough to touch me. I didn't sleep much that night either. It was like every time I shut my eyes, I saw that photograph again. Not the whole thing, just fragments. The edges, the hand. My own face, half buried in the pillow, mouth slightly open, completely unaware. It made me feel vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid. Not scared of monsters or anything, just scared of not knowing who might be near you when you're not looking. I kept checking the locks, front door, windows, even the sliding latch on the bathroom. I don't think I've ever locked the bathroom in my own apartment before, but I did that night, just to be sure. The next morning, I took the photo and put it in a drawer, not to forget about it, but to contain it. Leaving it out made me feel like I was inviting it to happen again. I didn't throw it away, though. I wanted to badly, but something stopped me. Maybe because part of me still needed proof it actually happened, that I didn't just imagine the whole thing, that I didn't fall asleep in front of some creepy movie and dream the rest. Around noon I went outside, not because I wanted to, but because I had to see the bus stop again, just to make sure I hadn't filled in details that weren't there. The sky was clear this time. Everything looked normal. Same graffiti on the side of the bench. Same faded schedule in the case. Nothing strange. No one waiting. I stood there for a while, trying to replay the moment in my head. The way he moved. The way he looked at me. And more than anything, that eye. That glassy, unfocused eye that didn't match the rest of his face. If someone was trying to fake being my dad, they did a weird job of it. Like they got almost everything right, except for one big thing. That part still didn't make sense. And then there was the jacket. That brown one he always wore. I hadn't thought about it in years, but standing there at the bus stop, it hit me I still had it, folded up in a plastic bin in the closet. I had kept it after he passed, along with some other clothes and his old tool belt. I hadn't looked at that stuff in forever. When I got home, I pulled the bin out. There it was, same worn collar, same faint grease stain on the left sleeve from when he spilled something working on his truck. I held it up and checked the pocket. Inside was a movie ticket stub from the week before he died. So the one at the bus stop couldn't have been his, at least not the real one. Still, the feeling didn't go away. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep right away. I made coffee around 10 and stayed up in the living room with the lights on. I didn't turn on the TV. Just sat there, waiting to hear something. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe another photo, a knock, something subtle. What happened instead was weirder. At about 1 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Nothing unusual at first old building, people come and go, but these were slow, deliberate. And they stopped right outside my door. I turned off the lamp and sat perfectly still. No knock, no voice, just silence. Then the mail slot creaked open. It didn't make a sound for a second, and then I saw something slide through. I waited a full minute before walking over. It wasn't another photo this time. It was a strip of paper, narrow, torn from something larger, and on it, in handwriting I swear I recognized, were 3 words. You forgot me. That's it. No signature, no explanation. Just that sentence, like an accusation, or a warning, or something in between. I stood there holding it, trying to place the handwriting. It wasn't perfect, but it was close to how my dad used to write notes to himself. Scraps on the fridge. Little things like call Joey or check the boiler. But this one didn't look like a reminder. It looked personal. I didn't go back to the couch. I didn't turn the lights back on. I just stood there staring through the peephole for what must have been close to 20 minutes. Nothing. When I finally looked out into the hallway, it was empty. No footsteps, no door clicks, just that humming fluorescent light and the same peeling paint near the stairwell. I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, I walked the whole building. Top to bottom, every hallway, every stairwell. I didn't knock on any doors. I'm not that bold, but I kept checking for anything strange. A door left cracked, a window open that shouldn't be. A neighbor I didn't recognize, but nothing stood out. Until I reached the basement. The laundry room was empty, one light flickering. The machines were off. But on the far wall, near the utility panel, someone had scratched something into the metal. It was faint, barely visible, but it said the same thing. You forgot me. Same phrasing, no punctuation, same feeling. I left immediately. I still don't know what I'm dealing with. Someone pretending to be him, a stranger with some weird agenda, a sick prank from someone who knew us both. And I hate even thinking this something else. Something I don't have words for. But whatever it is, it's not random. It knows who I am. And now, it wants me to remember something I've clearly tried to forget. I kept the strip of paper in my wallet. I don't know why. I didn't want to look at it again, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. It felt like evidence. Not the kind you bring to the cops, I knew how that would go, but the kind you hold on to when something doesn't feel finished. It was the same reason I still had the photo. Same reason I started locking the deadbolt even when I was home in the middle of the day. That whole week I kept waiting for something else. Another message, another noise. Another person in the hallway who looked almost familiar, but not quite. But nothing happened. Nothing obvious, anyway. Still, I could feel it. Not the kind of fear that rushes in and takes over, more like a slow build-up, like walking around your apartment with a cup of water and realizing every time you pass the hallway you spill a little without noticing. Then one day the floor is soaked, and you don't remember doing anything different. That's what it felt like. One night I came home from work, and my kitchen window was unlocked. Just a crack, not wide enough to think someone climbed through, but I never left it open, ever. I always made a point to check every lock before I left the apartment. It had become a ritual even before all of this. I didn't sleep in my bed that night. I stayed on the couch, half watching late-night cable and half just listening. Every creak sounded wrong. Every gust of wind through the hallway vent made me freeze. But nothing came. In the morning, I made myself go through the motions. Shower, eat, check the mail. Except this time, when I checked the hallway, something new was waiting for me. It wasn't another note or photo. It was a book. Hardcover, black spine, no title. It was leaning against my door like someone had left it there on purpose, not dropped, not lost, placed. I took it inside and sat with it at the kitchen table for almost an hour before I even opened it. Inside, it was filled with old newspaper clippings, all glued in, page after page. Most of them were small blurbs, local news stories from the 90s and early 2000s. A couple were from my neighborhood: fires, arrests, obituaries. About 15 pages in, I found one that made me stop. It was about my dad. Not a headline or anything, just a few paragraphs buried in a community column about a union protest at a construction site. His name was there, and next to it a photo I had never seen before. Grainy, black and white, but unmistakably him, standing with a group of guys all wearing hard hats. He was looking off to the side, not at the camera. Someone had circled his face in pen. No caption. I flipped through more pages, faster now. The farther I got, the more the clippings shifted. Less local news, more personal. One article was about a missing person, a teenage boy from another borough. No real connection to my dad or me, as far as I could tell. But that one had a note scribbled in the margin. Too late. Another article was about a fire in an abandoned building. No injuries, just property damage. The next page was blank, just an old Polaroid taped to the center. It showed a door. Just a door, unmarked, wooden. Could have been anywhere. It made my stomach turn, not because of what it showed, but because I recognized the doormat. It was the same one from the building across the street, beige with a tear in the corner. I had passed it 100 times. That night, I stood outside that door. I didn't knock. I didn't even step close. I just watched it, long enough to know no one was coming or going, long enough to convince myself I had imagined the whole thing. I left the building and went home. The next morning, my doormat was gone. Just gone. The floor was clean, like someone had picked it up and shaken it out, nothing else disturbed. Just that one detail removed. I wish I could say that was the moment I called someone, a friend, a therapist, even the police. But I didn't. Instead, I went back to the book. Near the end, tucked between 2 pages, I found a torn envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was me again. Same angle as before, same position in bed, but this time the camera had pulled back. You could see more of the room. And standing at the foot of the bed in the shadows was a figure. Not fully visible, just the outline, but enough to see the broad shoulders, the jacket, the limp. This time the photo wasn't just proof that someone had been there. It was a message. I was not alone. I had never been alone. And whoever this was wearing my dad's face, or pretending to, they were done waiting. They were showing me what they wanted me to see, piece by piece. I kept the second photo in a drawer next to the first one, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. It felt like crossing a line. Like if I tore it up or threw it away, something might escalate. I didn't say that out loud, obviously. I didn't even want to admit it to myself. But the thought was there, stuck in the back of my mind like a splinter. Over the next few days, I checked the hallway every morning before opening my door. No more books, no more notes, no more photographs. But I still felt like I was being watched. That part never went away. I stopped sleeping with my bedroom door shut. I started leaving lights on in the living room and kitchen. I started using my phone camera to take pictures of the locks before I went to sleep, just to reassure myself that I had actually locked them. The day after I found the second photo, I walked to the building across the street. The one with the doormat I had seen in the Polaroid. I didn't do anything dramatic, just walked past slowly, eyes down. The door looked the same, still unmarked, still closed, but the mat was different now, newer, same color, but clean, no rip in the corner. That could have meant anything. Still, something about it made my chest tighten. I thought about buzzing random apartments, pretending I had the wrong floor, but that felt risky. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. I was barely holding it together as it was. I walked home and didn't go back the rest of the week. I kept thinking about the note, "You forgot me." It had stopped sounding like a threat. It felt more like something personal. like whoever was doing this really believed I had wronged them somehow, that I had abandoned something important. And then I started thinking about my dad. Not the image from the bus stop or the fake version standing in the photo, but the real man, the one I remembered growing up. He was rough sometimes, quiet but strict, didn't like being questioned. Didn't show a lot of affection, but he tried in his own way. Left me tools instead of birthday cards. Took me to work sites instead of ball games. That was his version of bonding. We weren't close near the end. He got sick fast, and I wasn't good at hospitals. I visited less than I should have. When he died, I think I let the whole thing fade quicker than I was supposed to. I boxed up his stuff and barely looked back. I never really grieved, not properly. Maybe that was part of this. Maybe this was my brain pulling up some guilt I had never dealt with. That night, I sat in the kitchen with all the lights off and tried to remember the sound of his voice. It didn't come easily. That scared me more than anything. The next morning, there was something new on my table. I swear I locked every window and door. I checked the photo of the locks on my phone. Everything was just as I left it. But sitting on the center of the table was an envelope. Just one, unsealed, no writing on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. There were 5 names written on it, all in the same handwriting as before. Careful, neat, like someone who took their time. I didn't recognize any of them. I typed each one into a search bar. The first was a woman who went missing 10 years ago in Brooklyn. The second was a man who died in a fire, same neighborhood. The third was listed in a court case as a witness who later recanted. The fourth had no results at all. The fifth one had an obituary, cause of death listed as undetermined. I stared at that list for a long time, not knowing what to do with it. Were these victims? Witnesses? Was this a threat? A confession? Why was it left for me? What did it have to do with my father? I pulled out the old black book again, the one I found on my doorstep. I flipped through the clippings. Some of the names matched, not all, but 2. One from the fire, one from the court case. I hadn't noticed the overlap before. Now I started wondering if someone was using me to relive something, or maybe to finish something. I went back to the hallway camera feed on my phone. I had installed it years ago when packages started getting stolen. I had stopped checking it regularly, but now I scrubbed through the last 2 nights. Around 3 in the morning, I found it. A figure, blurred by the poor lighting, approached my door slowly, crouched down, stayed in frame for less than 10 seconds. No face visible, jacket hood up, broad shoulders, same shape. They left the envelope, then turned and walked away, not in a rush, like they knew no one would be watching. I saved the clip. I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't report it. I just watched it 3 times in a row, trying to see something that would help me feel less like I was unraveling. I couldn't. That night I didn't try to sleep. I sat up in bed with the list beside me. I read each name out loud, quietly, like I was trying to bring them into the room, like maybe one of them would mean something if I heard it in my own voice. And then I remembered something. A photograph I hadn't looked at in years, an old one, from my dad's workshop. I pulled out the box I had stored his things in. At the bottom was a faded picture of him standing in front of the garage. Behind him were 3 men, none of them labeled. I had always assumed they were just co-workers. Now I wasn't so sure. Because one of them, I swear, had the same face as the man from the hallway camera. And if I was right, that meant this didn't start last week. It started a long time ago. And maybe I was just the next person on the list. I sat with that photograph for a long time, not doing anything with it, just looking. The guy in the back third from the left, same jawline, same shoulders, same posture as the one from the hallway camera. The hair was shorter, and he looked younger, but something about the way he held himself made my stomach knot. There was a familiarity in how he angled his body slightly away from the camera, as if even then he didn't want to be seen head-on. I flipped the photo over. Blank. No names, no date. It looked like it had been taken in the early 2000s, maybe earlier. My dad was clean-shaven, which he hadn't been since I was in high school. The garage in the background had the old sign still up, Brenner and Sons Contracting, before they dropped the and Sons and just went by initials. I hadn't thought about that in years. The rest of that day passed in a fog. I didn't eat much. I left the envelope with the 5 names out on the table, lined up beside the black book. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't even sure I wanted answers anymore. It was starting to feel like the deeper I looked, the more I lost control of the story, like it wasn't mine anymore. Like it had shifted from something happening to me into something I was being dragged into. I went outside for a while just to get air, walked 3 blocks up and 2 over, didn't talk to anyone, just tried to move, tried to feel normal. It didn't work. Every face I passed looked a little too sharp. Every noise made me jump. I kept checking windows, checking reflections. I couldn't help it. That night I didn't plan to stay up, but my body wouldn't let me rest. Around 2:30 in the morning, I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a faint shuffle near the back window, the one in the bathroom. It's frosted glass, so you can't really see through it, just shapes, outlines. But there was definitely movement. Just for a second. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing followed. Still, I grabbed my phone and stepped into the hallway. I didn't want to call the police. I didn't have anything solid to tell them, but I was done pretending this was normal. I called Kayla instead. She was the only person I trusted to believe me without jumping to conclusions. We hadn't talked in months, but I didn't care. I needed someone else to hear what was happening. I kept my voice low. "Someone's been in my place," I said, more than once. There was silence on the other end for a second. Then she said, "Is this about your dad?" That threw me. I hadn't mentioned him yet, not directly, just said someone had been watching me, leaving things. "How did you know that?" I asked. Another pause. Then she said, "Do you remember that night he picked us up from the movies in high school? You fell asleep in the back seat." I didn't answer. "I heard him talking to someone in the front," she said, "but no one else was there." I remembered that night, barely. It had snowed earlier in the day. The windshield had fogged up. I thought he was just talking to himself. I didn't even think it was weird at the time. He said something like, "It's not time yet," she said, and then, "He'll remember when he's ready." I never asked him about it. I sat down on the floor, cold tile beneath me, still holding the phone. I didn't know what to say. She spoke again. I don't think it was a stranger at the bus stop. My throat felt tight. I think it was someone he knew, she said. Someone he brought around once, a long time ago. I saw him in a picture in your house once, in the background. I always remembered his eyes. Neither of us said anything for a while after that. Eventually, I hung up and sat in the dark for what felt like hours, trying to piece together how far back this went. If it was about my dad, and if other people had noticed something strange even when he was alive, then maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe I was just caught in the spillover of something older. When the sun came up, I went back to the photo. The garage, the three men, my dad in front. I scanned it again and noticed something I hadn't before. There was a door behind them, just barely visible, partially open, and someone was standing just inside it, almost hidden by shadow. Only half their face visible, and that face looked exactly like mine. Not similar. Exactly. My blood ran cold, but not in the dramatic movie way, more like a full body quiet. My fingers felt numb, my ears rang a little. I had no memory of being at that garage, no memory of ever being near that place while my dad was working. But it was me, or someone who wore my face, not like the man at the bus stop. This one was younger. My age now. Same expression I'd seen in the mirror 100 times. And suddenly, I remembered what Kayla said. He'll remember when he's ready. I put the photo down, stared at the wall, and asked myself the question I had been avoiding since the beginning. What if this wasn't someone copying my dad? What if this was about who he thought I would become? And what if he wasn't wrong? I stopped trying to explain it. That was the only way I could move forward. I had spent too much time tying everything together like it was a puzzle that just needed one more piece. One more clue, one more memory, one more old photo. But the more I tried to make sense of it, the more I felt like I was circling something that didn't want to be solved. It took me a while to realize it wasn't a mystery. It was a fracture, a slow tear in the line between memory and reality, between what I knew and what I believed. The day after I found the photo with my own face in the background, I went through every box I had from my dad's old life, every paper, every photo, every scrap I'd saved out of guilt more than sentiment. I looked for any mention of the men in that garage photo. There was nothing, no names, no notes. The picture itself had no context, just four men outside a shop and one barely visible figure in the dark. I didn't recognize myself in that photo, not really. But the face was mine, and that meant something was wrong, not supernatural, not sci-fi, just wrong in a quieter, heavier way. I started writing everything down, not to publish or show anyone, just to track it, to put it somewhere outside my head. If I could pin it to paper, maybe I could separate what had happened from what I thought had happened. The bus stop, the photo under my door, the book, the names, the list. The fact that someone or something kept showing up wearing my dad's face, or my own, and leaving pieces behind. I thought about getting help. I thought about it a lot. There were moments, quiet ones, usually around 4 in the morning, where I was almost sure I was having a break. Not a dramatic collapse, just a steady drift into something I couldn't walk back from. I hadn't told anyone everything, not Kayla, not even myself. I had only hinted, and I knew why. Because the part I was afraid to admit out loud was that I didn't want it to stop. That sounds awful, but it's the truth. Somewhere in all the fear and confusion, there was this undercurrent of meaning, like whoever or whatever was behind it all had been trying to show me something real, not to hurt me, but to remind me. Of what, I wasn't sure, but it felt like it had to do with my dad, with the kind of man he had been, with the kind of man he thought I was going to be. I started hearing things again. Not whispers, not voices, just sounds, in the vents, in the hallway. At first I thought it was paranoia, but then I started recording them. Not with my phone, but with an old handheld recorder I found in one of my dad's boxes, the kind with the little cassette tapes. I'd leave it running at night. In the morning, I'd play it back. Mostly static, a few creaks. One night, there was a voice, not loud, not clear, but real. It said, "You're almost there." That was all. Just that one sentence. I played it over and over until the tape wore out. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know how. The next night, I slept better than I had in weeks. No nightmares, no waking up in a sweat, just sleep. And when I woke up, there was a third photo. This time it was not inside the apartment. It was outside, under the mat at the front door, which was strange because I had not replaced the mat since it went missing. But there it was, the same mat, same tear in the corner. The photo showed me walking away from a building. My building, shot from behind. I was wearing clothes I hadn't worn in years, a jacket I gave away after college, sneakers I threw out after they split. My hair was shorter, my posture looked different. I almost didn't recognize myself. But it was me. The timestamp, if it could be believed, was dated 5 years earlier. And suddenly I remembered something I hadn't thought about in forever. There had been a night back then, around the time of my dad's funeral, when I thought I saw someone following me on the train platform. I remembered the way I kept looking over my shoulder, the way I walked home faster than usual, the way I told myself it was nothing. And now I was looking at proof that someone had been following me, back then, before the bus stop, before the photo, before the whisper. It had started earlier than I realized. Maybe it had never really stopped. I didn't panic. I didn't run. I just sat down on the steps and held the photo in both hands. And I realized something else. I was never supposed to figure it out. This wasn't about solving a mystery. This was about confronting a part of myself I had tried to bury: grief, guilt, memory, fear, all the stuff I had packed away after my dad died, all the things I told myself didn't matter. The quiet inheritance no one talks about. The mental cracks that start to spread when you pretend you're fine for too long. So I stopped pretending. I started therapy. It's not dramatic, no big revelations yet, but I'm talking, I'm asking questions, I'm sleeping better. Sometimes I still hear things. A cough in the vent, a knock that no one else hears. Sometimes I think I see him, my dad, not the one from the bus stop, the real one, just out of the corner of my eye. standing in doorways, watching me as I move from one room to the next. But I don't run from it anymore. I just nod, because I think maybe this whole time that's all he wanted, for me to see what he left behind, for me to face it. And now, finally, I am. I never liked camping as much as my friends did, but when you are the one who always bails, eventually you stop getting invited. So when they asked this time, I said yes right away. I thought it would be good for me. A couple of nights out in the woods, beers by the fire, no responsibilities. I kept telling myself I needed the break. It started out normal enough. We threw our stuff into the back of my friend's truck and drove for hours. The further we went, the less cell service we had, until it cut out completely. It felt like we were slowly peeling away from the world, which I guess was the point. The GPS on my phone barely held on, but it showed a spot marked as a campsite way back in the forest. Not one of the main campgrounds, but a hidden one, tucked off an old service road. My friend grinned when he saw it. Perfect, off the grid. The road narrowed into something that hardly looked like a road at all. Trees pressed in on both sides, branches scraping the truck, and I remember thinking, if we get stuck out here, no one is coming to help us. It was late afternoon by the time we finally pulled into a small clearing. The GPS showed the pin right where we were, but if not for that, you would never have guessed it was a campsite. No signs, no fire rings, nothing but a flat patch of dirt surrounded by heavy trees. We set up the tents quickly before it got dark. I tried to shake the weird feeling in my gut, chalking it up to nerves. I had not camped in years, and it felt strange being that deep in the woods, away from every familiar sound. No hum of cars, no glow of streetlights, just trees and silence. By the time we got a fire going, the unease had started to fade. We cracked open some beers, passed around a bag of chips, and settled into the rhythm of the night. My friends swapped dumb stories, half true and half exaggerated, and for a while, it almost felt like we were kids again, sneaking out and daring each other to stay in the dark longer than a minute. But every time I looked past the fire, the trees felt closer, heavier. The light from the flames made them seem alive, shadows shifting and swaying. I told myself it was just the beer. When it was time to sleep, I crawled into my tent, zipped the flap, and lay there listening to the fire crackle down to embers. My body was tired, but my mind would not shut off. I thought about how far we were from town, how my phone was useless, how no one even knew exactly where we had gone except the three of us. For some reason, that thought sat on my chest like a weight. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cool air. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not just quiet, but wrong. No bird song, no insects buzzing, nothing. Just stillness. Then I saw the trail we had driven in on, or what should have been the trail. Overnight, it was blocked. Branches and logs had been dragged across the path in neat stacks, like someone had built a barrier. Rocks were piled on top of each other, deliberate, not random. My stomach dropped. I thought maybe a storm had blown things down, but there had been no storm. The sky was clear, the ground dry, and the way the branches were arranged, stacked like a wall, it was not the work of nature. When my friends woke up, I pointed it out, expecting them to freak out. They laughed instead, said it was probably kids, or maybe forest rangers blocking off a trail that was not meant to be used. They brushed it off, but I could not. The nearest town was miles away. What kids would be out here in the middle of the night dragging logs around? We tried to find another way out, but every path we walked ended the same way, blocked with piles of branches or carefully stacked rocks. Each one felt like it had been arranged with intention, like someone wanted us to know we were not supposed to leave. By midday, my nerves were raw. We argued about whether to stay or push through the barriers. My friend said we would deal with it in the morning, that we should just enjoy the trip. I agreed out loud, but inside, I felt trapped. That night, as we sat around the fire again, the air felt heavier. The silence pressed in, thicker than before. My friend cracked a joke about Bigfoot, but no one laughed. The fire popped, sparks drifting into the dark, and for a long while, no one spoke. When it was time to turn in, I lay in the tent staring at the nylon ceiling, my ears strained for sound. That was when I heard it. A faint whistle, not like a bird, not random. It was deliberate, 3 short notes, drifting through the trees. I held my breath. The sound circled the camp, moving slowly, always just far enough away to keep me guessing. My dog barked once, sharp and nervous, then went silent again, pressing against me like he wanted to crawl inside my skin. I wanted to believe it was the wind, some trick of the forest, but deep down I knew better. The whistling moved like it had purpose, like someone was walking a slow circle around our tents. I lay there all night, too afraid to sleep, staring at the thin fabric wall between me and whatever was out there. Every time the whistle faded, I thought it was gone, only for it to start again minutes later. By morning it was silent again. My friends acted like nothing had happened, but I could tell they had heard it too. None of us said a word as we sat around the cold fire pit, sipping burnt coffee from tin mugs. We all kept glancing at the blocked trail, at the woods beyond, each of us waiting for someone else to admit that something was wrong. But no one did, and that was somehow worse. The second morning felt worse than the first. I had not slept at all after the whistling. Every rustle of leaves, every shift of fabric in the tent made my heart jump. When I finally crawled out into the pale light, my friends were already up, sitting around what was left of the fire. Neither of them said anything, just sipped their coffee with blank expressions. I knew right then they had heard the whistling too. None of us wanted to be the first to admit it. I made myself busy, poking at the ashes with a stick, pretending not to notice the way the air felt heavy again. The forest should have been alive with birds and insects in the morning, but it was just silent. Too silent. I tried to tell myself it was normal, maybe just a quirk of the area, but deep down I felt the truth pressing against me. Something was wrong with this place. We decided to try another route out, even if it meant hiking miles through the trees without a real trail. One of my friends pulled out a compass, and we picked a direction, thinking if we went straight long enough we would eventually hit the service road. At first it felt like a good idea. The air was cooler under the trees, and for a while I could almost forget the dread from the night before. But within an hour, we found another barrier. Not branches this time, but rocks. Dozens of them stacked waist-high, arranged carefully across the path like a wall. They were balanced so neatly that when my friend shoved at one, the whole pile collapsed in a crash of stone. The sound echoed through the forest, and for a moment, we all froze. It felt like shouting in a cathedral, like we had broken some unspoken rule. We moved on quickly, stepping over the fallen rocks, but I could not shake the image of them stacked so deliberately. They had not been there yesterday. Someone had built them overnight, knowing we would find them. As the day dragged on, I felt eyes on us. Every time I turned, I caught only trees. My skin prickled, my stomach twisting tighter with every step. My dog was restless, ears pinned back, growling low at the empty woods. He kept looking behind us, whining, like something was trailing just out of sight. By late afternoon, we admitted defeat and circled back to camp. My legs ached, my throat was dry, but more than anything, I was exhausted from the constant edge of fear. I thought maybe if we just packed up and started driving, we could push through the blocked trail. But when we got back, the truck felt smaller, weaker, like it would not stand a chance against the walls of branches and rocks that seemed to multiply by the hour. Back at the clearing, things were not the same. The campsite looked different, like someone had been through it while we were gone. My tent flap was open, though I knew I had zipped it. A few of our bags were shifted, not rifled through but moved, like someone had picked them up, studied them, and set them back down. That night, we sat around the fire in near silence. Every crackle of wood made me flinch. The forest pressed close, the darkness thick and complete beyond the glow of the flames. One of my friends finally spoke, his voice tight. He said maybe it was locals trying to scare us away, that some people did not like strangers in their woods. It was the most rational thing any of us had said all day, and I clung to it, even though it did not explain everything. We decided to take turns keeping watch. I got the first shift. I sat on a log with the fire hissing low, staring into the dark, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The hours stretched, and my mind wandered to every story I had ever heard about people vanishing in forests, about strange rituals and cults. I told myself over and over that it was just kids messing around. Just people. That thought was almost comforting, even if it was not true. Somewhere past midnight, the whistling started again. This time it was closer. 3 short notes, circling, drifting in and out, always moving. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I gripped the flashlight, fighting the urge to sweep it across the trees, terrified of what I might see. My friend stirred in his tent and called out, asking if I heard it too. I lied. I said it was the wind, just the wind moving through the branches. He did not believe me. I could hear it in the way he went quiet. The whistling went on for what felt like hours. Sometimes it sounded right behind me, faint but sharp, and I had to fight not to spin around. My dog pressed against my leg the whole time, trembling, his eyes locked on the dark. When my shift was over, I crawled into my tent, shaking, and tried to sleep. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I heard something new. Soft thuds, spaced evenly apart, like footsteps on the dirt. They moved around the tent, slow and deliberate, circling once, twice, then fading into the trees. I held my breath the whole time, barely daring to move. When it finally stopped, I lay awake until dawn, eyes burning, every muscle stiff from tension. In the morning, my friend shook me awake, his face pale. He said there was something I needed to see. We walked a short way into the trees, to a clearing none of us had noticed before. In the center stood dozens of rock piles, each one carefully built, balanced in eerie silence. On top of each cairn rested a skull, not human but animal. Deer, raccoon, fox, maybe even a coyote. The skulls were weathered but arranged with care, each one staring out toward the trees. I felt sick. My stomach churned, and I had to swallow hard to keep from gagging. The air felt thick, heavy with something I could not name. No one spoke. We just stood there, staring at the rows of stone and bone, the forest around us silent as a held breath. Finally, my friend muttered that we should go back, that we should pack up and get the hell out as soon as possible. But deep down, I knew it was already too late. We spent the rest of that morning in a kind of daze. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but we were rattled. The cairns with the skulls sat only a couple 100 yards from where we had slept. The idea that they had been there all along while we sat drinking around the fire made my skin crawl. Back at camp, the mood was heavy. We moved slower, quieter. Normally, packing up a campsite takes time, but when you know you should not be somewhere, it is like your body knows to hurry. We stuffed clothes into bags, broke down the tents without folding them right, crammed gear into the truck. I kept glancing at the tree line, waiting for something to step out and watch us. When the truck was loaded, we headed straight for the road we had driven in on. The plan was simple. Push through whatever barrier had been set up, even if it meant scraping the hell out of the truck. We just needed to be moving. But when we got there, the barrier was gone. The trail was clear, like it had never been blocked at all. The branches, the rocks, the logs that had been piled high across the path were nowhere in sight, just dirt and tire ruts stretching into the forest. We sat there in silence, staring, My first thought was that maybe the rangers had moved it, but that made no sense. They would not have cleared it and vanished without a word, and besides, this road was not even on a map. The idea that someone had been out here in the middle of the night, moving piles of branches as tall as a man, made my stomach twist. We drove forward, slow at first, like we expected the trail to vanish again. But nothing happened. For a mile, maybe two, the road stayed clear. That was when the engine coughed. It happened once, then again, and then the truck shuddered and died. My friend cursed, tried the ignition again, but nothing. We sat there with the hood steaming, the forest closing in on both sides, and the reality hit me like a punch. We were stranded. We popped the hood, but none of us knew enough about cars to fix whatever had gone wrong. The air smelled faintly sweet, like coolant, and the radiator hissed. My friend muttered something about it overheating, but the way the engine had died felt more final, like it had been drained. We decided to walk back to camp and figure it out later. None of us said it, but the truth hung there between us. We were being played with. Whatever or whoever was out here was not just trying to scare us. They were controlling the game. That night the fear settled in deeper. We tried to build the fire higher, like maybe light alone could protect us, but it only made the shadows dance bigger. The forest stayed silent, watching. Around midnight the whistling started again, not faint this time, close, moving around the tents, circling like before, but slower, heavier. My dog barked once, a sharp, broken sound, then cowered against me in the tent. I pressed a hand to his fur and whispered for him to be quiet, my throat so dry it hurt. Then came the sound of footsteps, bare feet on dirt, slow, dragging, circling. I wanted to unzip the tent to shine my flashlight out, but I could not move. I lay there frozen, clutching the dog, counting the seconds between each step. Somewhere to my left, fabric ripped. Not loud, but enough that I knew. One of the tents had been slashed open. I heard my friend yell, a panicked, muffled curse, and then silence. No struggle, no running, just silence. I waited, heart hammering, until I could not take it anymore. I crawled out of my tent, shaking, flashlight beam cutting into the dark. My friend's tent was torn wide open, the flap hanging like loose skin. He was standing outside, pale, eyes wide. He shook his head at me, finger pressed to his lips. We both froze as a shape moved between the trees. Not an animal. Too tall, too human. A figure, bare-chested, skin pale even in the dark, hair hanging long and tangled. It moved with a strange, jerking gait, half walking, half dragging itself. For a moment it stopped and stared at us. I swear its eyes caught the light like an animal's, reflecting white. Then it melted back into the trees. We stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching sticks like weapons, jumping at every sound. The whistling came and went, sometimes close enough I thought it was right outside the firelight. My dog whimpered until his body trembled. By dawn, we were wrecks. My friend wanted to leave on foot, to hike out no matter how long it took. The other argued it was too dangerous, that we should wait for daylight to push further down the road. I just sat there, numb, listening to them argue, because none of the options made sense. Every path out of here felt like walking into a trap. That morning, when I went to grab my pack, I noticed something I could not explain. On the dirt by my tent, clear as day, were footprints. Small ones, child-sized, bare feet pressed into the soil, circling the tent, weaving between the adult prints that had come before. My blood went cold. I called the others over, and we all stood there staring at them. Not a word between us, just that shared look of disbelief and fear. By the time the sun was high, we forced ourselves to try the truck again. Miraculously, it started. The engine roared to life like nothing had ever been wrong. We piled in fast, not even breaking down the camp fully, just shoving gear into the back and slamming the doors. As we drove, none of us spoke. Every time I glanced in the mirrors, I expected to see someone running behind us, barefoot, keeping pace with the truck, but the road stayed clear for a while. We passed another barrier, piles of branches stacked across the trail, higher than the truck, but this time there was a gap, just wide enough to drive through, almost like they had left it open for us. We kept going, the silence in the cab thick. By the time we made it back to the clearing, the sun was sinking again. We had not escaped. Somehow, some way, the road had looped us right back to the same camp. The fire pit was still there, cold and gray. Our torn tents, our scattered bags, everything exactly where we had left it. Only one thing was different. Right in the middle of the camp, balanced neatly on a flat rock, was a new cairn, smaller than the ones we had seen before, but unmistakably deliberate. And resting on top was not an animal skull this time. It was a knife, one of ours, placed blade up, waiting. I wish I could say we grabbed the knife, jumped in the truck, and floored it out of there. But we just stood there staring at it. It was not even one of those moments where you argue about what to do next. All of us froze, like our brains needed time to catch up. The knife had been in my pack. I remembered using it the first night to cut open a bag of jerky. Now it was here, balanced perfectly on top of a cairn that had not been there when we left. I felt something in me break a little. Up until then, I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe rangers had put up the barriers. Maybe locals were screwing with us. But standing there, staring at one of our own knives displayed like a message, I knew we were not imagining this. Someone or something was out here, watching every move we made, close enough to unzip my bag and take what they wanted. My friend muttered that we should just get in the truck and keep driving. He said if the road looped us back again, we would just keep trying until it did not. The other friend shook his head. He said we needed to stay put. That moving only made us more lost. He was pale and sweating, eyes darting between the trees like he expected something to lunge out at us. I could not take the silence of the forest anymore. It pressed down like a weight, like the trees themselves were leaning in to listen. I said I did not care where we went. I just could not stay here another night. The idea of sleeping within sight of that cairn, that knife gleaming in the low sun, made my stomach turn. But by the time we had finished arguing, the light was already fading. None of us wanted to be on the road after dark. So we built another fire, bigger than before, feeding it with every branch we could gather. The flames roared, casting wild shadows that only made the trees seem closer. The night dragged. Every time I thought the fire was dying down, I threw on more wood. None of us slept. We sat in silence, flinching at every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. My dog pressed against me, trembling so hard I could feel it in my bones. Around midnight, the whistling started again, the same 3 notes, slow and deliberate. It circled us, drifting through the trees, sometimes faint, sometimes close enough that I thought I could feel breath on the back of my neck. My friend hissed at me not to shine my flashlight. He said he did not want to see, and honestly, neither did I. Then came the footsteps, soft, dragging, moving just beyond the firelight. I gripped a stick tight enough that the bark bit into my palms. My dog growled, low and constant, his eyes locked on the dark. Something shifted at the edge of the clearing. A figure, just outside the glow of the fire. Tall, thin, unmoving. My eyes watered from staring, trying to make sense of it. For a moment I thought maybe it was just a tree, but then it swayed, not with the wind, but forward, like it had stepped closer. I blinked, and it was gone. None of us spoke. We sat there until the fire burned down to embers, until the sky began to pale. By then my body felt hollowed out from exhaustion. Every muscle ached from sitting tense all night. When the sun finally rose, we stumbled to the truck. It started again, like before, with no problem at all. That almost scared me more than when it had died. Like whoever or whatever was out here wanted us to leave, but only when they were finished with us. We drove until the road disappeared again, blocked by another wall of branches. This one was taller, thicker, impossible to push through, and resting on top, balanced with care, was my dog's leash. I had left it in the tent. My chest went cold, my hands numb on the steering wheel. We turned back, defeated, and circled through the forest for hours. Every turn, every fork, led us back to the same place, the camp, the clearing. By afternoon, we were back at the fire pit again. Something had changed. The cairn with the knife was gone. In its place were 3 smaller cairns, each one topped with something personal: a hat, a watch, and a lighter, all ours. Items that had been zipped in our bags, now arranged carefully on display. I do not think I have ever felt fear like that. It was not just being watched. It was knowing that whatever was out here could move among us, go through our things, pick and choose what to take, and we would never know until it was too late. That night, we did not bother with the fire. We sat in the truck, doors locked, windows rolled up, clutching what little we had left. My dog paced in the back seat, whining, scratching at the glass. When the whistling came, it was louder than before, not circling, stationary, right outside the truck. 3 short notes, repeated again and again, patient and deliberate. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, whispering over and over that it was just people, just locals, that if we waited long enough the sun would come and we would leave. But even as I said it, I did not believe it. The footsteps started around 2 in the morning. Soft, barefoot, moving around the truck, slow circles, pausing now and then starting again. My friend swore under his breath, clutching the knife he had grabbed from the cairn. My other friend sat with his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth, whispering to himself. At one point, something brushed against the truck, hard enough to rock it on its tires. My dog lunged at the window, barking until his throat was raw. The figure passed by again, close enough that I saw pale skin flash in the beam of the dying flashlight. I do not know how long it went on. Hours, maybe. When the first light of dawn touched the trees, the whistling stopped. The footsteps faded. The forest went still again. When we climbed out of the truck, the ground around us was covered in footprints. Dozens of them. Bare, human, circling the vehicle over and over. Some were small, child-sized. Others were longer, wider than any foot I had ever seen. We did not talk about it. We just sat there in the silence, staring at the prints until the sun was fully up. I thought I was afraid before, but that was the moment it hit me. We were not lost in the woods. We were trapped. By the 5th day, we were ghosts of ourselves. No one slept more than an hour at a time. Our eyes were ringed with purple, our skin gray from the cold and the nerves. Even my dog was different. Normally he was hyper, tail always wagging, ready for anything. Now he just sat with his head low, ears pinned back, whining softly at things none of us could see. The forest seemed to know it had us. That morning the air felt heavier than ever. The silence had gone from strange to unbearable. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. Just the occasional creak of branches that sounded more like bones snapping. Every sound made me jump, convinced it was something creeping closer. We tried to eat, but every bite turned to sawdust in my mouth. One friend barely touched his food at all. He just sat there staring at the tree line, knife clutched in his lap like he was waiting for something to step out. The other friend muttered nonstop, whispering about maps and roads, drawing lines in the dirt that never made sense. We argued again about leaving. Part of me thought we had to hike out, even if it meant walking until our legs gave out. The truck felt useless, like a cage on wheels. But the idea of walking those woods, with whatever had been circling us at night, made my chest seize. My friend with the knife swore if we just waited one more day, we would find a way. He said maybe the sun would burn off whatever this was. His voice cracked as he said it, like even he did not believe the words. When we went to gather more firewood, we found something new. About 50 feet from camp, between the trees, a fresh cairn stood. This one was taller, nearly up to my chest, stacked with stones darker than the others. On top sat something that made my stomach lurch. It was one of our shirts, folded neatly, smeared with what looked like dried mud or blood. I could not bring myself to check. We did not touch it. We just backed away and pretended we had not seen it. But the image burned into my mind, and I kept seeing it every time I closed my eyes. That night, we tried to stay in the truck again. We locked the doors, pulled the curtains we had rigged over the windows, and huddled together in silence. My dog would not stop pacing, nails clicking against the metal floor, growls rumbling low in his throat. Around midnight, the whistling started again, louder than before, not circling, just a single voice, clear and deliberate, coming from the tree line. The same 3 notes, drawn out, echoing through the clearing. My friend clapped his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth. The other gripped the knife so hard his knuckles went white. Then came the footsteps, not slow this time, fast, running, circling the truck, darting in and out of the firelight we had left smoldering. I saw shadows streak across the windows, shapes too fast to focus on. My dog went wild, barking, lunging at the glass. The truck rocked hard, once, twice, like something had slammed against it. We all shouted at once, panic flooding the cab. The windows rattled, the doors groaned. My friend screamed for me to drive, but I could not move. The keys were in my hand, but my body would not obey. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The truck went still. The whistling faded. The forest was silent again. We sat there frozen until dawn, every muscle locked, barely breathing. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to open the door. My legs shook as I stepped out, scanning the clearing. The ground was covered in prints again, bare feet, circling the truck in overlapping rings. But this time, something was different. At the back of the truck, pressed deep into the dirt, were handprints. Dozens of them, small, child-sized hands, smeared into the soil like they had been clawing at the ground. I felt bile rise in my throat. My friend cursed under his breath, backing away like he could erase the sight from his mind. The other just collapsed onto the dirt, head in his hands, whispering that we were never getting out. I tried to rally us, tried to sound steady, but my voice shook. I said we had to leave that day, no matter what. I said if the road looped us again, we would keep driving until the truck gave out. Anything was better than another night. We packed fast, not bothering to fold anything, just shoving gear into the back. The air felt thick, heavy with something I could not name. My dog whined non-stop, pulling at his leash toward the trees like he wanted to bolt. When we climbed into the truck, my heart hammered so hard I thought I might pass out. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth as if nothing had ever been wrong. That alone was enough to send a shiver through me. It felt like permission, like we were being allowed to try again. We drove, faster than before, tires skidding on the dirt. The trees blurred past, and for a moment, hope sparked in my chest. Maybe this time we would make it out. But after an hour, the road narrowed. My stomach dropped as the same clearing came into view. The same fire pit, the same scattered gear we had left behind. Only now, the cairns had multiplied, dozens of them, some as tall as us, some small and crooked, dotting the clearing like gravestones. And on top of every single one sat something of ours. Clothes, utensils, even my friend's wallet, items we had not even realized were missing yet. We sat there in silence, staring. My dog growled low, hackles raised, eyes locked on the tallest cairn. I followed his gaze and felt my chest seize. On top of that cairn, balanced perfectly, was my camera. The lens was cracked, but the red light blinked. It was recording. I wish I could tell you that we hit reverse, spun the truck around, and found a way out of those woods. I wish I could say we fought back, or that we caught a glimpse of whoever had been toying with us. But the truth is a lot more pathetic. We sat there in that truck, staring at the clearing, staring at those cairns lined up like some kind of ritual. and not one of us could move. The camera on the tallest cairn blinked red in the early light. I felt sick, realizing it was recording us even then, capturing our frozen faces through the windshield like we were part of a show. I do not know how long we sat like that. Minutes, maybe hours. My sense of time had been shredded. Eventually, my friend snapped. He slammed his hand against the dashboard and started yelling that we had to leave. He threw the truck into gear, and we lurched forward into the clearing. My dog barked frantically, claws scraping against the seats. My other friend just muttered no over and over, like a prayer. We drove straight through the cairns. Stones tumbled, clothes scattered. Items of ours we did not even realize were missing crunched under the tires. The sound was deafening, like bones breaking. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of control. But as we smashed through them, the whistling started again. Not distant this time, not circling. It was everywhere, filling the air. Dozens of voices layered on top of each other, all playing the same 3 notes in a horrible chorus. My chest clenched so tight I could barely breathe. The truck shot down the road, faster than I thought it could go, engine screaming. I gripped the wheel until my hands went numb. The trees blurred, the whistling chased us, and every shadow looked like it was about to step into the path. And then, as suddenly as it started, we burst out into sunlight. Real sunlight. Open sky above, asphalt under the tires, the unmistakable hum of real road. My friend in the passenger seat laughed, a broken, high-pitched sound that did not sound human. My other friend just sobbed quietly into his hands. We did not stop. We drove until we hit a gas station miles away. The first human faces we had seen in what felt like forever nearly brought me to tears. I remember stumbling inside, babbling nonsense to the cashier, who just stared at us like we were crazy. When I finally checked my phone, I saw something that made my stomach drop. New photos had appeared in the gallery, dozens of them, all taken while we were in the truck that night. Shots of us sleeping, huddled, pale and broken. Photos from angles that could not have been real, like someone had been sitting in the cab with us, leaning close. The last photo was of me, just me, taken from behind, like someone had been sitting in the back seat. My head was turned slightly, my mouth half open in sleep, and in the corner of the frame, just barely visible in the reflection of the window, was a pale face smiling. I deleted every photo, but I swear deleting them did not make a difference. We never talked about it again, not properly. We drove home in silence, dropped each other off like strangers. The friendship did not survive whatever happened in those woods. I still get the occasional message from one of them, usually late at night, usually just a few words. Do you hear it too? Or, do you think it's over? I never answer. I moved apartments within the month. I sold most of my camping gear, got rid of the truck. I tell myself I am done with the woods, that I will never go back. But the truth is, it followed me. Not in the way you are thinking. I do not see pale figures in my hallway or footprints in my yard. Nothing like that. But some nights, around 3 in the morning, I wake up with my heart pounding, ears straining, certain I am about to hear that sound, that 3-note whistle. And once, just once, I swear I actually did. It came from outside my window, faint and patient, like it had all the time in the world. I did not look. I stayed under the blanket, frozen, every muscle locked until the sun came up. By morning, there was nothing there. No prints, no cairns, no sign at all. But I know what I heard. I have not been camping since. I do not go near the woods, not even a hiking trail, not even the edge of town where the trees start to thicken. The thought alone makes my chest tight. People laugh when I tell them why, so mostly I just say, I am not outdoorsy. It is easier than explaining. Sometimes I wonder if it is still out there, waiting for someone else to wander in. Maybe it was never about us. Maybe it was just the place itself, the forest, that wanted to keep us. Or maybe it is not done. Maybe it is still watching, still waiting, still circling closer every time I close my eyes. I do not know. What I do know is this: when I lie awake at night, listening to the silence, I still hear it in my head. That whistle, those bare feet dragging across dirt, the sound of rocks being stacked with careful, patient hands. And I know deep down that if I ever hear it again for real, there will be no escaping a second time. I was not really planning to camp solo. It just kind of happened. Originally, a friend was supposed to come with me, someone I used to work with back in Raleigh, but she bailed last minute. Family emergency, or maybe a bad excuse, hard to tell with her. I had already booked the days off work and packed everything. I figured, screw it, I am going anyway. 2 nights on the Appalachian Trail near Standing Indian Mountain. Not a crazy trek or anything, just enough to clear my head. I left my car at a tiny trailhead lot around noon on a Friday, signed into the little logbook at the post, and headed out with a loaded pack and a dull sense of optimism. The first few hours were uneventful. The trail was beautiful. The trees were thick with early spring green, and the breeze made that soft rustling sound that always puts me in a better mood. I barely saw anyone after the first hour. One guy and his dog passed me going the other way. He was sweaty, looked tired, and just nodded as he passed. By late afternoon, I had picked a spot near a small ridge, maybe 50 yards off the trail. It was flat, had some natural cover, and just enough space for my tent. I made camp, boiled some ramen, and sat watching the sun go down through the trees. It got dark fast. There is something weird about how quickly the woods swallow light. I read for a while by headlamp, wrote a few lines in my notebook that were probably trying too hard to sound like something worth remembering, and then crashed a little after 10. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up needing to pee. The kind of wake-up where your bladder is basically yelling and there is no going back to sleep until you deal with it. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, shivering a little. It had gotten colder than I expected. As I was standing there, half asleep, I heard this sound. 2 short whistles, high-pitched, about a second apart, coming from the trees to my left. I froze. Not scared exactly, just alert. It could have been anything. A bird, maybe. An animal breathing weird. I stood still for a bit, waiting to hear it again. But it was silent. No wind, no leaves crunching, just the woods holding their breath. I finished peeing, got back in the tent, zipped up, and told myself not to be dramatic. It was nothing, just forest noise. Normal stuff. Still, it took a while to fall back asleep. The next morning I packed up and hiked about 6 miles deeper in. The trail cut through some denser forest before opening up near a stream. I set up near a bend in the water, tucked a little downhill from the main path. It felt even quieter than the day before. I only saw one other person all afternoon, a woman maybe in her 50s with trekking poles and mirrored sunglasses. She waved. I waved back. She kept moving. That second night, I was more relaxed. I made some instant mashed potatoes with tuna, which sounds awful but honestly hit the spot. I laid back, watching the sky darken through the tree canopy. There was that moment of total silence again right before full dark, where even the birds stop making noise. I am not used to real silence, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I got in the tent a little before 11, slept pretty well at first. Then, at exactly 3 in the morning again, I woke up. Not from a dream, just suddenly wide awake. I do not know what made me do it, but I whistled, 2 short notes, like what I had heard the night before. A few seconds passed. Then 3 whistles came back. Closer this time. That sound did something to me, not panic, not even fear exactly, just a sense that I had done something wrong, like knocking on a door I did not actually want opened. I sat there in the tent, holding my breath, waiting for something else, but the night went still again. Eventually I fell asleep, heart racing. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing I noticed was that one of my socks was missing. I had taken them off before sleeping and left them just inside the tent flap. Now only one was there. I thought maybe I kicked it in my sleep, so I checked all around the tent, even outside. Nothing. Then I saw the rocks. Right outside my tent, maybe 5 feet from the door, someone had stacked 5 stones into a little tower. They were balanced perfectly, dry, no moss or dirt. And on top of the stack, my missing sock, folded, not just placed, folded like laundry. There were no footprints, no signs of animals. The ground was undisturbed except for that one little spot. I did not eat breakfast. I packed up in silence, kept glancing over my shoulder as I broke camp. The hairs on my neck would not go down. I told myself it had to be some kind of prank. Maybe other hikers messing with me, but it felt personal, like someone had been watching. I hiked all day with that weird pit in my stomach. Around 4 in the afternoon, I found a spot closer to the main trail, still off the path, but not as deep in. I wanted to be near enough to people that I could hear them, just in case. I almost didn't set up the tent. I considered just hiking out in the dark, but my legs were sore, and I did not want to risk getting hurt rushing downhill. I cooked, but barely touched the food. I sat up until after midnight, flashlight on, just staring into the woods, listening. The third night, the whistles came again. I didn't whistle back. I just sat still in my sleeping bag, every muscle tense as I heard them move. Not footsteps, not exactly, but movement, breathing, the sound of something knowing exactly where I was. And then I saw them, someone, 50 yards away, just beyond the tree line, not moving, just watching. I did not move for what felt like forever, just watching, trying to convince myself it was some hiker messing around, or maybe a ranger doing a late patrol, but there was no flashlight, no movement, no signal. Just a figure standing perfectly still among the trees 50 yards away. It did not wave. It did not call out. It did not even seem to breathe. I wanted to shout, to run, to hide, but my body refused. I was frozen, not out of fear, but because I did not trust myself to breathe or blink. The whistle had come again, soft and close now, like it was right behind me, though the figure had not moved. I barely remember crawling back into my tent. My hands shook as I zipped the door closed, triple checking every seam. The forest seemed to hum with quiet life, but none of it was natural anymore. I stayed awake until the first light, listening for footsteps, whispers, anything that might mean I was not alone. But the forest remained silent, except for the birds waking up and the distant rush of the river. Morning brought a dull ache in my head and a gnawing anxiety I could not shake. I looked out the tent flap and scanned the clearing again. The figure was gone. No sign it had ever been there, except for the lingering sense of eyes still watching. I packed slowly, taking everything down with careful hands. I did not want to leave anything behind that could be used to lure me back or signal the presence of whoever or whatever had visited me. My socks were both there this time, folded neatly inside the tent like they had been untouched. Hiking back to the main trail felt strange. The woods seemed smaller, tighter, like the trees were leaning in to watch me pass. I tried to ignore the feeling but failed every time I looked over my shoulder. No one was there, but the weight of those watching eyes was real. By mid-afternoon, I reached a tiny clearing where the trail opened up to a small meadow. It was a spot I had read about in old hiking forums, a place where the wildflowers bloomed in bursts of color and the wind moved through the grasses like waves on the ocean. I set up camp near the edge of the meadow, close enough to hear the distant hum of a highway, but far enough that the noise was just a faint drone under the bird song. I needed the reminder of civilization, even if it was miles away. The afternoon passed quietly. I wandered down to a small creek and drank the cold water, watching minnows dart between the rocks. The sun was warm on my back, and for a moment I let myself believe I was just a hiker, out for a weekend escape. As dusk fell, I began to feel the old unease creeping back. The sky deepened to shades of violet and blue, and shadows stretched long between the trees. I ate a meager dinner, trying to focus on the sound of my own breathing instead of the silence around me. When I settled into my tent that night, I made a point of locking the zipper and stacking my backpack against the door for extra weight. I was not sure if that would help against whatever was out there, but it felt like something. At exactly 3 a.m, the whistles returned, this time 4 short calls spaced evenly apart. They echoed through the trees, bouncing from trunk to trunk. I closed my eyes and held my breath, hoping they would stop, hoping it was all in my head. The whistles did not stop. I stayed still, waiting for any other sound. Then, out of nowhere, the tent flap rustled. Not a breeze, not an animal, something brushing against the fabric. Something just outside, right by my head. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. I reached for my flashlight, fumbling with numb fingers, and flicked it on. The beam sliced through the darkness, catching only empty forest floor and a single small stone resting just outside the tent. I did not recognize the stone. It was smooth, dark, and oddly heavy. It felt like it had been polished. I did not throw it away or move it. Instead, I slid it inside my sleeping bag with me, hoping it was some kind of talisman or token of protection. I did not sleep after that. The whistle calls faded and returned intermittently, like a signal or a song. The night stretched on endlessly. By dawn, I was exhausted but relieved to see sunlight again. I packed quickly, eager to leave that place behind. As I broke camp, I found another stack of stones outside the tent. This time, there were 7. They were arranged in a circle with the small stone from last night at the center. I stared at the formation, a cold shiver running down my spine. I had no idea what it meant or who had made it, but I was certain I was no longer alone in those woods. The hike out was long and slow. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call set my nerves on edge. I kept looking for footprints or broken branches, but found none. No sign that anyone or anything had followed me. When I finally reached the trailhead parking lot, I collapsed into my car and locked the doors. The sound of the engine felt like a shield against the woods, but the feeling of being watched did not leave me. I drove home through empty country roads, the forest fading behind me like a bad dream, but the whistle calls, soft and distant, seemed to echo in my ears long after I was safe inside my apartment. I do not know what the whistles were, or who was sending them. I do not know what those stones mean or why my socks were folded and left outside my tent. But I do know one thing. If you are ever camping alone in the mountains, and you hear whistles in the trees at night, do not answer. I tried to put the whole thing behind me, the whistles, the stones, the figure standing in the trees. I told myself it was just some weird coincidence, maybe a prank by other hikers, or my imagination running wild after too many late nights working and too much caffeine. But something about those nights stuck in my head, nagging at the back of my mind, refusing to let go. A few days after I got home, I found myself scrolling through forums about the Appalachian Trail and strange things people had seen. Most were the usual stories about bears, bad weather, or losing their way. But then I found a few posts about whistles. Not the friendly kind you use to call a dog or get someone's attention, but eerie, long-distance whistles that seemed to come from nowhere and carried an odd message. Some said it was hikers warning each other about danger. Others thought it was something older, some kind of signal from the forest itself. One post stuck with me. It was from someone who had gone missing near Standing Indian Mountain about 5 years ago. The last message they left was about strange whistles at night and a pile of stones found outside their tent. The post was deleted, but people said the user disappeared without a trace. I shook it off as much as I could, but the idea that I was not the first, and maybe not the last, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A few weeks later, I went back to the trail, not to camp, but to hike and clear my head. I wanted to see the places I had been without the fear that had settled over me like a shadow. Maybe if I faced it head on, it would lose its grip. This time, I went during the day and stuck to the main path. I passed the spots where I had camped before, noticing details I had missed. A broken branch here, a patch of moss there, and those smooth stones still stacked in quiet places. I met a few hikers, and we shared stories over short breaks. None mentioned whistles or strange sightings, but I could tell some were wary of the deeper woods. One man, older with a thick beard and a worn hat, told me about an old legend, about something that lived in the trees, using whistles to call travelers deeper into the forest. "It is not something you want to answer," he said, looking me in the eye. "Not unless you want to get lost for good." I nodded, not sure if he was joking or serious. That night, I stayed in a small cabin near the trailhead. It had electricity and a heater, but I still felt the weight of the forest pressing in around me. I could almost hear the whispers of leaves and the soft whistles carried on the wind. Sleep was restless. I dreamed of shadows moving between the trees, eyes watching, and the soft folding of socks on the ground. The next morning, I found a small stone on my windowsill, smooth and dark like the one from the woods. I did not know how it got there. No one else had been in the cabin. I stuffed the stone in my pocket and left quickly, deciding I needed distance. But the feeling followed me. Whistles in the background of my thoughts, the cold weight of stones in my pocket, the sense of eyes always watching. Back home, I started carrying the stone with me everywhere. It felt like a connection to those nights, and maybe a reminder to stay alert. A few days later, my phone rang late at night. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. The line was silent, except for a faint whistle. 2 short notes, almost a call. I wanted to hang up, but held the phone to my ear. Then a voice, barely above a whisper. "You answered." I dropped the phone. The call ended. That was the last straw. I knew I could not keep ignoring whatever was out there. I had to understand it, find out who or what was sending those whistles, why they chose me, or if they even did. I started researching everything I could find about Appalachian legends, old tribal stories, and the history of Standing Indian Mountain. There were tales of spirits that guarded the forest, using sound to communicate. Whistles were often mentioned as a way to warn or lure, depending on the spirit's intent. Some stories spoke of travelers who heard the call and followed it, never to return. Others talked about those who ignored the sounds and made it through, but always changed somehow. I found references to piles of stones left as markers or messages, but none that matched the precise arrangement I had seen. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I really understood. One night, sitting in my apartment, the stone heavy in my hand, I thought I heard a whistle outside, soft and distant, but clear enough to stop my breath. I looked out the window, nothing but the dark city street and the quiet hum of streetlights. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or a car passing far away, but deep down, I knew it was not. The whistles were still calling, and I was still listening. After that night, I decided I could not just sit around waiting for the whistles to come back. I had to do something. I started carrying the stone everywhere, like a reminder or maybe a shield against whatever was out there. It felt heavy, almost comforting, but also a little like a chain. I was tethered to those woods, whether I liked it or not. I reached out to some local hiking groups online, hoping to find someone else who had heard the whistles or seen strange things on that part of the Appalachian Trail. Most people thought I was joking or just looking for attention. A few offered vague stories about unexplained noises or people disappearing, but no one had any real answers. It was like the forest kept its secrets tight. One message stuck with me. A woman said she had camped near Standing Indian Mountain years ago and heard the same whistle calls at night. She told me she never answered, but the next morning she found a pile of stones outside her tent, just like mine. She said it felt like a warning. I asked if she ever saw anyone or anything. She said no, but that she felt watched for weeks after. She stopped hiking after that. That hit me hard. Maybe the whistles were not some prank or random sounds. Maybe they were a message or a trap. I decided I needed to go back, but this time with a plan. I wanted to record the whistles, see if they had a pattern, try to communicate or at least understand. I packed light but brought a recorder, extra batteries, and a good flashlight. I told a friend where I was going and when to expect me back. It felt like I was gearing up for a mission, not a casual hike. The trail was quieter than before, maybe because it was midweek or because fewer people were out this time of year. I set up camp at the same spots as before, though I was careful to pick a place with better visibility and less cover. The first night was uneventful, except for the usual sounds of the forest. Crickets, owls, the rustling of leaves, no whistles. I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just stress or too many horror stories. The second night, just before 3 a.m, I heard it. 2 short whistles. I fumbled for my recorder, turning it on with shaking hands. I stayed still and waited. 3 whistles came back, closer, clearer. The sound was unlike anything I had heard before. It was almost melodic, but with a sharp edge that set my teeth on edge. I tried to whistle back. 2 notes again, soft and slow. The forest was silent for a moment. Then, footsteps, slow and deliberate, not running or rushing, but steady. I held my breath, listening as the sound came closer, stopped, and then moved away. The recorder was still running. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I felt different, like the forest had acknowledged me, like I was part of some game I did not understand. In the morning, I found another stack of stones outside my tent, this time 10, arranged in a line leading away from the clearing, deeper into the woods. I followed the stones for a while, curious and cautious. They led me to a small clearing I had not noticed before, filled with old trees twisted into strange shapes. Moss covered the ground in thick blankets, and the air smelled damp and ancient. In the center of the clearing was a large stone, flat on top like an altar. On it lay a bundle of dried leaves and a small carved wooden whistle. I picked up the whistle, feeling the rough edges beneath my fingers. It was light but well made, with symbols etched into the surface. I put it to my lips and blew gently. The sound was hollow and eerie, echoing through the clearing. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I tucked the whistle into my pocket and made my way back to camp, heart pounding. That night, I did not hear the whistles. Instead, I dreamed. Dreams filled with dark woods and endless shadows, voices whispering in languages I could not understand, a presence watching me, waiting. I woke up soaked in sweat, clutching the wooden whistle in my hand. I knew I could not keep running from whatever this was. I needed answers. The next day, I headed back to town to find someone who could help me understand the symbols on the whistle. I found an older man who ran a small local museum focused on Appalachian history and folklore. His name was Harold. Harold looked at the whistle with interest, running his fingers over the carvings. "This is old," he said slowly. "Very old. These symbols are from a native tribe that used to live in these mountains long before settlers came." He explained that whistles like this were used in rituals to communicate with spirits of the forest. Some were meant to call for protection, others to warn of danger. "But be careful," he warned. "Not all spirits are friendly. Some are tricksters, and others, well, they do not like being disturbed." I felt a chill but nodded. I had already learned that much the hard way. Harold suggested I visit a local elder who might know more about the old ways and the legends tied to the mountain. I agreed, grateful for any lead. That evening, as I prepared to leave, the whistles returned. 2 short notes, clear and insistent. I answered with the wooden whistle, careful to match the rhythm. The night seemed to listen. The following morning, I set out to find the elder Harold had mentioned. His directions led me to a small cabin tucked deep in the woods just outside a nearby town. The path was narrow and winding, lined with thick undergrowth and towering oaks, whose branches interlocked overhead like fingers guarding secrets. When I arrived, an elderly woman opened the door before I could even knock. She had bright eyes, sharp and alert despite her age, and a face weathered by years of sun and wind. She looked me over quietly, then invited me inside without a word. The cabin smelled of burning wood and herbs. Shelves lined with jars of dried plants, old books, and handmade trinkets filled every corner. The woman sat by a table covered in papers and small carvings. "I hear you have questions," she said softly. I nodded, holding out the wooden whistle. "Harold sent me. I found this in the woods, and I have been hearing whistles at night ever since. I do not understand what is happening." She took the whistle gently, turning it over in her hands. "This belongs to the old ones," she said. "The spirits of the forest who watch and protect these mountains. They speak in whistles and leave signs for those who listen." She told me stories that stretched back centuries, about the relationship between humans and the forest spirits, about respect and caution, how the old ones would guide travelers away from danger or warn them when something was wrong. "But," she said with a serious look, "sometimes the forest grows restless. When people come who do not understand or respect, the old ones send warnings. Whistles to keep you away, stones to mark your place. They watch and wait. I listened, feeling a mix of awe and fear. It all made sense in a way that words rarely do. The whistles were not random, they were a language, and I had broken some unspoken rule by answering. She handed me a small bundle of dried sage and a feather. "Burn this when you camp," she said. "It will calm the spirits, show them you mean no harm, but do not expect it to keep you safe if you do not respect the woods." I thanked her and left, feeling the weight of her words pressing on me like the thick forest canopy. That night, back at my camp, I lit the sage and let the smoke curl through the air. The whistles came again, as they always did. This time, I did not respond. I sat quietly, watching the tree line, waiting for something. The night stretched on with only the occasional soft whistle echoing around me. I felt less alone, but not less watched. The next morning, I packed up, deciding it was time to leave the forest behind. I had learned enough, and I wanted to keep whatever peace I had found. But as I walked the trail back to my car, I found one last pile of stones, not carefully stacked this time, but scattered like a warning. Among them was a single folded sock, my sock. I stopped, heart pounding, and looked around. The forest was silent except for the wind moving through the leaves. No sign of the figure or any footsteps. I picked up the sock and tucked it into my pack. I was done answering whistles, done following stones, done trying to understand. The drive home was quiet. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone watching me from the tree line. When I got back to my apartment, I threw my gear in the closet and tried to sleep. But the whistles never left. They haunted my dreams, echoed in empty rooms, whispered just beyond my hearing. I realized then that some things do not stay in the forest. They come with you. They wait. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I still hear those whistles. 2 short notes, like a call I cannot ignore. And I wonder if I ever really left the woods behind. The days after I returned home were a strange mix of relief and unease. The forest was gone, but the memory of those whistles and stones clung to me like a shadow. I kept the wooden whistle on my desk, next to my phone and keys, as a reminder of what I had experienced, and maybe a warning of what I still could not escape. At work, I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to the woods. My coworkers noticed. I was quieter than usual, distracted, and sometimes jumped at the smallest noises. I told myself I was just tired, maybe burnt out, but deep down I knew something had changed. One evening, a few weeks after my last trip, I was walking home from the grocery store. It was late, and the street lights cast long shadows on the sidewalks. I felt like someone was following me, but whenever I turned, no one was there. As I reached my apartment building, I heard it again, 2 short whistles, soft but clear, coming from the alley beside me. I froze. My heart raced, but I forced myself to move. I walked faster, my footsteps echoing on the pavement. The whistles came again, this time 3 quick calls. I did not look back. Inside my apartment, I locked the door and checked all the windows. Nothing, no sign of anyone or anything. I thought about calling the police, but who would believe me? Someone calling with whistles, telling stories about stones and socks left on the ground. It sounded crazy. That night, I barely slept. The whispers of the whistles played in my mind, echoing louder with each hour. In the following days, the whistles came more often. In the streets, outside my window, even over the phone. Sometimes they came with a shadow at the edge of my vision. I started carrying the wooden whistle everywhere, blowing into it when I heard the calls, hoping to respond correctly or at least make peace. One afternoon, I received a letter in my mailbox. No return address, no signature, just a single line written in shaky handwriting. Respect the forest, and it will respect you. I thought about everything the elder had said, the old ones, the spirits watching and guarding, how the forest wanted respect, not fear or defiance. I decided I had to do something, not just for myself, but for anyone who might follow that trail, who might hear those whistles and not know what to do. I reached out to local hiking clubs and wilderness groups. I shared my story and the warnings I had learned. Some people listened, others dismissed me. But a few thanked me, saying they had heard similar things or had felt something strange in those woods. I started volunteering with a trail maintenance group, helping keep the paths clear and safe. It felt good to be part of something, to give back to the forest in a small way. One day, I returned to the spot where I had found the wooden whistle. I placed it carefully on a flat stone near the clearing, wrapped in a cloth with some sage from the elder. I said a quiet thank you to the forest and the old ones, hoping it was enough. As I walked away, I heard the softest whistle, just one note this time, like a farewell. I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Life returned to something close to normal. The whispers of the forest faded to a distant memory. The piles of stones stopped appearing. The folded socks never came back. I still carry a little fear and respect for the woods and their secrets, but I have learned that sometimes listening is the most important thing. If you ever find yourself camping alone in the mountains and you hear those whistles in the trees at night, remember this: do not answer them. Respect the silence, respect the forest. Because some calls are not invitations, they are warnings. And sometimes the forest is watching. The cottage is old, nestled in the rolling hills of rural Devon, far enough from the nearest village that the silence can be both a comfort and a kind of pressure. When I first moved here, it felt like a dream come true, a chance to live away from the noise, to breathe in fresh country air and find some peace. I knew the house had a history, but I thought it was empty except for me. The previous owners left years ago, and I haven't seen another soul around except for the occasional farmer driving past on the lane. The cottage creaks and settles in the way old houses do. You get used to the sounds of the wind in the eaves and the wood expanding and contracting. But there's one noise that I can't explain, one sound that has been following me since I moved in. It's footsteps. Not just any footsteps, but a very specific pattern. I hear them pacing upstairs, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, then repeat over and over. I'm always on the ground floor when it happens, lying in bed, trying to sleep. The stairs lead right above my head, so the sounds are loud and clear, echoing down through the floorboards. It's like someone is up there, walking back and forth with a rhythm, a deliberate pace. The pattern is consistent, as if someone is practicing a dance or pacing nervously, but I've never found anyone else in the house. At first, I thought it might be a wild animal nesting in the attic or rafters. The countryside is full of foxes, badgers, and owls that sometimes find shelter in old buildings like this. But the footsteps are too precise and regular for an animal. No animal walks 3 steps forward and 1 back in perfect sequence. Besides, I never heard scratching or other typical animal sounds. I started keeping a log noting the nights when the footsteps happened. It was almost every night, usually late around midnight, but sometimes earlier or later. The rhythm never changed. 3 steps forward, 1 back, repeated in an endless loop. The sound would last for about 5 to 10 minutes before fading away, leaving the house silent again. Sometimes when the footsteps stopped, I thought I heard a faint giggle, soft and childlike, barely audible but unmistakable. One night I set up my phone to record the sounds. I placed it on the bedside table, facing the ceiling where the stairs creak above. I stayed awake, listening intently. At around 1:30 in the morning, the footsteps began, the familiar 3 steps forward, 1 back, steady and clear. Then, just as the steps slowed and stopped, there was a soft giggle, light and airy, like a child hiding in the shadows. The recording shook me. I listened over and over, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But that giggle was real as the footsteps echoing through the old beams. I shared the clip with a friend who lives nearby, and even she got goosebumps listening to it. She asked if I was sure I was alone, if maybe someone else was living here or had been secretly sneaking around. But I knew the house better than anyone. There was no one else. The doors were locked, the windows secured. I'm certain I'm the only person here. I began searching the cottage thoroughly, trying to find any sign of another presence. I checked the attic, the crawl spaces, and the hidden corners beneath the floorboards. Everything was empty, just dust and old furniture. No footprints, no discarded belongings, nothing to suggest someone else had been here. It was as if the footsteps belonged to a ghost or some lingering memory etched into the house itself. The thought unsettled me but also fascinated me. What if the footsteps were a replay of something long gone, a spirit trapped in time, endlessly pacing in a loop of memory? The giggle felt like a connection, a hint of personality behind the sounds. It wasn't frightening exactly, but it was deeply strange, like living with a secret companion whose presence I could neither see nor touch. Sometimes when I'm lying awake listening, I try to imagine who it might have been. A child playing, a restless soul, someone who once lived in this house and left a piece of themselves behind. The cottage feels alive with stories, and the footsteps are a part of that ongoing narrative. I don't know if I will ever find out the truth about the footsteps above, but for now they are a part of my nights here, rhythmic and steady, a ghostly dance echoing through the beams and whispering of a past that still lingers. The footsteps continued night after night, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat, echoing through the wooden beams above my bedroom. I tried to settle into a routine, reminding myself that old houses make all sorts of noises, that the wind rattling the windows or a branch brushing against the roof could cause creaks and knocks. But the footsteps were different. They were too measured, too consistent. The 3 steps forward, 1 step back pattern repeated again and again, never wavering in tempo or rhythm. I began keeping a notebook beside my bed, jotting down the nights and times the footsteps appeared. It was almost like clockwork, though there were occasional nights when the house was silent. Usually the pacing started just before 1 in the morning and lasted for about 10 minutes. After the footsteps ended, the quiet would stretch out, heavy and thick, only broken by that faint, soft giggle I sometimes heard, just as the sounds faded away. That giggle was the part that unsettled me the most. It wasn't a childish, playful laugh, but something lighter, almost wistful, like the sound of someone remembering something joyful, yet unreachable. It lingered in the air, barely there, but unmistakably human. It made me wonder if the footsteps belonged to a person who had once lived here, someone who was repeating a memory, trapped in a loop of the past. One afternoon, I decided to investigate the upstairs rooms more thoroughly. The cottage has a narrow staircase leading to a landing and 2 small bedrooms. Both rooms were empty when I moved in, one converted into a storage space with dusty boxes and old furniture covered in sheets. I carefully explored every inch, hoping to find some clue, maybe an old diary, a photograph, anything that might hint at who had lived here before me. In the attic, I found nothing but cobwebs and a few broken trinkets left behind long ago. No footprints, no signs of recent activity. Still, the feeling of presence was stronger there. Standing beneath the low rafters, I could almost hear the faint echo of footsteps above, pressing into the wooden floorboards. I also spoke with some neighbors, people who had lived in the area for years. They remembered the previous tenants, an elderly couple who had moved out some time ago, followed by a brief vacancy before I arrived. The couple was known locally but had no children, and no one mentioned any unusual happenings at the time. It was as if the footsteps and giggles were something older, something the neighbors had never noticed or were reluctant to speak about. Determined to get more answers, I visited the local library and archive to research the history of the cottage. The building had been here since the late 1800s, part of a cluster of small homes built for workers in the nearby mills. Over the years, many families had lived here, some for only a few years, others for decades. I found old census records, newspapers, and even photographs of the neighborhood from different eras. One record stood out, a young girl named Annie who had lived in the cottage in the early 1900s. She was described as lively and playful, often seen running through the garden and up and down the stairs. The story said she had died tragically at a young age after a sudden illness, leaving her parents devastated. Some older residents in the village remembered tales passed down about Annie, about her laughter still heard echoing in the house on quiet nights. The thought of Annie's spirit replaying footsteps and giggles sent a chill through me. It seemed to fit, the rhythmic pacing like a child running back and forth, the light giggle like a whisper from the past. Maybe the cottage held her memory so strongly that it was imprinted on the very floorboards. I began leaving small things in the upstairs rooms, toys and a few drawings I made, hoping to offer some comfort or acknowledgement. Sometimes I would find the toys slightly moved or the drawings turned over. It felt like a silent conversation, a way for Annie's presence to reach out without fear. At night, I talked softly to the footsteps and the giggle, telling the spirit I saw her and that she was welcome to stay as long as she liked. The pacing became less frequent, but no less distinct. I began to think of the footsteps as a kind of lullaby, a rhythm that connected me to the history and life of the house. Despite the eerie nature of the experience, living with the footsteps above became part of the cottage's charm. It was a reminder that the walls hold stories, that the past lingers in places we least expect. Annie's presence was a thread tying me to a long chain of lives lived in this old home. Still, I remained cautious. I never go upstairs alone at night, and I always make sure to leave a light on. The footsteps are a comfort, but also a mystery, a reminder that some stories are only partially told. I don't know what Annie wants, or if she will ever rest fully, but for now, the rhythmic dance of steps above is a presence that I have come to accept, a ghostly heartbeat of the house that keeps me company in the quiet of the night. The footsteps continued to echo above me every night. It was like clockwork, the 3 steps forward, 1 step back, the pause, then repeat. I began to feel as though the sound was less of a mystery and more of a companion, an unseen presence pacing the floorboards in time with my own breathing. But there was always that strange mix of comfort and unease. Knowing the footsteps were there made me feel connected to the history of the cottage, yet I could not shake the feeling that something remained unresolved. I found myself thinking more and more about Annie, the girl who once lived here. The record of her life was brief and filled with sadness. A lively child, taken too soon by illness, leaving behind only memories and whispers that seemed to seep into the very walls. It was heartbreaking to imagine her running up and down the stairs, the echoes of her youthful energy lingering after all these years. The rhythmic footsteps and soft giggle now made sense as remnants of her presence, perhaps repeating moments she once cherished. The idea of Annie's spirit replaying her past intrigued me. Could a memory be so strong that it imprinted itself on the house, playing on a loop like an old record? Was the cottage a kind of time capsule, holding on to fragments of the lives it had sheltered? I didn't know the answer, but I felt drawn to explore this connection further, to understand the story behind the footsteps and the giggle that haunted my nights. One afternoon I decided to clean the upstairs rooms thoroughly. The furniture was covered in dust and cobwebs, and the air smelled of aged wood and forgotten years. As I worked, I found a small box tucked away in a corner. Inside were faded photographs and yellowed letters, fragile with age. They belonged to a family who had lived here long ago. Among the photos was one of a young girl, her smile bright and eyes full of life. Annie. The letters revealed a glimpse into the family's life. They spoke of happiness and hardship, of a daughter taken too soon, and of parents struggling to come to terms with their loss. There was a tenderness in the words, a love that transcended time. Reading these, I felt closer to Annie, as if I was holding a piece of her story in my hands. That night, I sat on my bed and read aloud from one of the letters, hoping the spirit might hear. The footsteps began their familiar pattern, gentle and steady above. As I finished the letter, a soft giggle echoed down to me, warm and clear. I smiled, feeling a connection that went beyond fear or curiosity. The next day, I started leaving small gifts in the upstairs rooms, a simple doll, a bouquet of wildflowers picked from the garden, and even a handmade card with a drawing of a sunny day. These were offerings of kindness, gestures of acknowledgement for the presence I felt so strongly. Sometimes I would find the gifts slightly moved or arranged differently, subtle signs that Annie was interacting in her own way. Despite these small moments of peace, the footsteps still carried a weight. It was as if the spirit was caught between worlds, replaying fragments of a life that had ended too soon, unable to move on completely. I felt a responsibility to help, to find a way to bring closure to this restless energy. I reached out to a local historian and paranormal expert, someone who had experience with old houses and lingering spirits. She came to visit the cottage, walking through the rooms with a quiet reverence. She explained that it was common for spirits tied to strong emotions to remain, replaying moments of significance. The repetitive footsteps could be a loop of Annie's last memories, or a comforting routine she held on to. Together, we prepared a small ritual to honor Annie's memory and offer her a chance for peace. We lit candles, said words of compassion, and spoke directly to the spirit, inviting her to find rest beyond the house. As we did, the footsteps began slowly, steady but softer, as if the spirit was listening. Then the pacing gradually faded, the silence settling like a gentle sigh over the cottage. In the days after, the cottage felt lighter. The heavy presence lifted, replaced by a quiet warmth. The footsteps no longer echoed above my bed, and the giggle was heard only in my dreams. Momo seemed calmer, no longer startled by unseen noises. The house felt whole again, as if a chapter had closed. Living here now feels different. The cottage is filled with history and memory, but no longer burdened by restless echoes. Annie's story remains a part of this place, a gentle reminder of life's fragility and the ties that bind us across time. I carry her story with me, grateful for the connection and the peace we found together. The footsteps may have stopped, but the spirit of the house lives on in the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind, and the stories told in the quiet moments before sleep. And sometimes, when the night is still and the world fades away, I feel a presence beside me, warm and familiar, as if Annie's laughter still dances through the beams above. The cottage seemed to breathe with a new kind of calm after the footsteps finally stopped. Nights were quiet, the weight of unseen pacing lifted like a fog clearing from a morning field. I still felt the presence of those who had come before me in subtle ways, a faint scent of lavender or wood smoke drifting through the halls, the soft creak of floorboards where no one stood, but these signs brought comfort rather than fear. The house felt alive with memory, but it no longer pressed against me with that heavy sense of longing and unrest. Living here in rural Devon, away from the noise and rush of city life, gave me plenty of time to reflect. I thought a lot about Annie, the young girl whose life had touched this place so long ago. Her story stayed with me, haunting in its brevity, but vivid in the glimpses I'd caught through old letters and photographs. I imagined her playing in the garden, running up and down the stairs, her laughter echoing softly on summer afternoons. Knowing that a part of her had lingered here through footsteps and giggles made me feel less alone. I found myself drawn to the local village more often. The people were friendly but reserved, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's stories but didn't always share them openly. I visited the small library and museum, asking about the history of the cottage and its former residents. The librarian pulled out dusty ledgers and photographs, helping me trace the families who had lived in the house through the decades. She told me that the cottage had always been a home for working families, mill workers, farmers, and artisans who built their lives in the surrounding countryside. The walls had witnessed births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows. It was a place where joy and grief mingled, where every creak and whisper was a fragment of a larger story. I felt honored to be a part of that ongoing history. One afternoon, I came across a stack of old letters tucked away in the museum archives. They were correspondence between Annie's parents and distant relatives, filled with worries and hopes, plans for the future that were never realized. Reading them, I felt the weight of their loss and the strength of their love. The letters spoke of a family trying to hold on to each other despite the heartbreak of losing a child. It was a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Back at the cottage, I continued my small rituals of remembrance. I tended the garden, planting wildflowers that Annie might have loved. I left small offerings upstairs, a doll here, a painted stone there, tokens of acknowledgement and care. I spoke to the empty rooms, telling Annie's story aloud, as if sharing it with an old friend. Sometimes, when the light caught the corner of a room just so, I thought I could see a flicker of movement, like a shadow dancing in the periphery. The nights grew longer and colder with the changing seasons. I found warmth in the simple routines, lighting the fire, brewing tea, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. The cottage felt like a sanctuary, a place where the past and present intertwined gently. The footsteps that had once echoed through the house were now part of its silent memory, a rhythm that had found its rest. Sometimes when I lay in bed in the stillness before sleep, I imagined Annie's laughter carried on the breeze, playful and light. The giggle that had once startled me now seemed like a lullaby, a gentle song that reminded me that even in loss there is beauty. The cottage was not just a building but a keeper of stories, a guardian of souls who had called it home. I thought often about the thin veil between worlds, about how the past can reach out in unexpected ways. The footsteps above were not a haunting but a message, a reminder that love and memory endure beyond time and space. That sometimes the most profound connections are the ones we cannot see but only feel. Living here taught me to listen to the quiet, to the unseen, and to the stories whispered by old walls. The cottage became a place of healing, a space where the living and the departed shared a delicate harmony. And in that harmony, I found peace. As I write this now, the house is quiet, bathed in the soft glow of a winter afternoon. The garden outside is bare, but waiting for spring. Inside, the fire crackles gently, and Momo snoozes by the hearth, content and calm. The footsteps above are gone, but their echo remains a heartbeat in the history of this home. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I hear a faint giggle, carried softly through the beams, reminding me that some stories never truly end. They live on in the spaces between, in the warmth of remembered laughter, and in the footsteps that once danced above my bed. After the footsteps stopped and the house seemed to settle into a quiet peace, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened in the months since I moved in. The cottage, which once felt like just a quiet retreat, had become a place layered with memories, stories, and connections that stretched across time. Annie's presence lingered softly, like a gentle whisper in the walls, reminding me of the fragility and beauty of life. I started to understand that the cottage was more than just a home, it was a living archive of the people who had passed through, their joys and sorrows embedded in the wood and stone. I continued visiting the local village regularly, building relationships with the people who had lived here for generations. Their stories gave depth to the history I had uncovered in archives and old letters. One afternoon, an elderly woman invited me to her home to share her memories of the neighborhood. She spoke of a vibrant community, of children playing in the fields and families gathering for celebrations. She remembered Annie as a bright and curious child, full of energy and laughter. Her stories painted a picture of life that was both ordinary and extraordinary, a tapestry of moments that made the cottage feel alive. Back at the cottage, I worked on restoring parts of the garden, planting flowers and herbs that were mentioned in some of the old letters and records. It felt like a way to honor the past and create something new, a bridge between then and now. Momo seemed to enjoy the garden too, often lounging in the sun or chasing the occasional butterfly. The house was filled with life, light, and warmth, a stark contrast to the eerie nights I had first experienced. One evening, I found myself sitting in the attic room, the space where I had first felt Annie's presence most strongly. The air was cool and still, the fading light casting long shadows across the floorboards. I opened the window just a crack to let in the fresh country air and sat quietly, listening. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint sound, perhaps a giggle or the patter of footsteps, but when I looked around, there was nothing. I smiled softly, feeling the connection still there, subtle and comforting. I started writing again, inspired by the stories and memories that had unfolded around me. My journal filled with reflections on life, loss, and the invisible threads that connect us all. Writing became a way to process the experience, to keep Annie's story alive, and to explore the ways in which places hold the echoes of those who have lived there before. It was a personal journey, one that deepened my appreciation for the cottage and the history it carried. Despite the peace that had settled over the house, I sometimes found myself thinking about the unknown. What if the footsteps had been something other than a memory? What if there were still mysteries hidden in the corners of the cottage, waiting to be uncovered? The thought was both thrilling and humbling. I realized that some things are meant to remain just beyond our understanding, a reminder of the vastness of life and the many stories that weave through it. Living in the cottage also taught me about patience and presence. I learned to listen deeply, not just to sounds, but to the atmosphere, the subtle shifts in energy that hinted at stories beneath the surface. It was a practice in mindfulness, a way to honor the past while embracing the present. The footsteps above had been a catalyst for this awareness, a reminder that every place has a story, and sometimes those stories reach out to us in unexpected ways. I continued to care for the cottage with a sense of stewardship. Repairs were made carefully, respecting the original character and history of the building. I found joy in simple tasks, tending the garden, lighting the fireplace on cold evenings, and enjoying quiet mornings with a cup of tea and a book. The cottage became a sanctuary not just from the outside world, but from the rush and noise of modern life. Friends who visited often commented on the warmth and charm of the place, sensing the history that filled it. I shared some of Annie's story with them, not as a ghost tale, but as a story of connection and remembrance. It became a way to bring others into the circle of memory, to remind us all of the lives that shaped the places we call home. As the seasons turned, the garden bloomed with new life. Wildflowers nodded in the breeze, and the scent of herbs filled the air. Momo chased shadows and basked in the sun, content and peaceful. The cottage, once heavy with mystery, had become a place of light and hope. One night, as I lay in bed listening to the quiet, I thought I heard that soft giggle again. It was faint and fleeting, a sound carried on the wind through the open window. I smiled and whispered a quiet thank you, feeling the presence of Annie nearby, not as a ghost or a haunting, but as a gentle spirit woven into the fabric of the cottage and the life I had built here. The footsteps above may have faded into silence, but their story lives on in the garden, in the memories shared, and in the quiet moments when the past and present meet. The cottage is a home filled with history and heart, a place where stories are remembered and love endures. And in that enduring presence, I found my own peace. The final months living in the cottage unfolded with a quiet grace that I had not expected when I first arrived. The footsteps that once echoed with eerie precision above my bed had ceased, replaced by a stillness that felt profound rather than empty. The presence that had shared my nights seemed to have moved on or found the peace it had long sought. And yet the cottage remained alive with memory, a place where past and present intertwined like the gentle tendrils of ivy climbing the old stone walls. I found a deep sense of belonging here, one that went beyond the physical shelter of the house. It was a connection to the stories etched into the very fabric of the place, to the lives that had breathed and loved and lost within these walls. Annie's story in particular became a part of my own, a reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of the spirit. In the garden, the wild flowers I planted flourished, their bright faces turning toward the sun. I often sat among them, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath my fingers, the whisper of the breeze through the leaves. It was a place of renewal, growth, and hope. I thought about Annie running through these same gardens long ago, her laughter mingling with the song of the birds. The cottage had taught me patience and presence. I learned to listen not just with my ears, but with my heart to the subtle rhythms of the world around me. The footsteps above were no longer a source of fear, but a symbol of connection, a reminder that the stories of those who came before continue to shape us in unseen ways. On clear nights, when the stars shone bright overhead, I would stand by the window and gaze out into the dark fields. The air was crisp and still, carrying the scent of earth and wood smoke. Sometimes in the quiet, I thought I heard a soft giggle carried on the wind, a gentle echo of Annie's spirit, free and at peace. I documented my experiences in a journal, hoping that someday someone else might find comfort in these words. I wrote about the footsteps, the giggle, the sense of presence, and the journey from fear to understanding. It was a story of loss and love, of mystery and healing, a testament to the enduring power of memory. The neighbors remained kind and welcoming, sharing stories and passing on small tokens of the village's history. Their warmth made the cottage feel even more like home, a place where the past was honored and the future embraced. As winter turned to spring, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The cottage was no longer just a refuge, but a place of life and light. The footsteps that once filled the nights with uncertainty had given way to silence, and in that silence I found peace. Momo, my steadfast companion, continued to explore the garden and nap by the fire, a quiet witness to the passage of time. His calm presence was a reminder that life goes on, that joy and sorrow weave together in the fabric of existence. The house stood firm, a guardian of stories and memories. Its walls held the laughter of children, the whispers of secrets, and the steady beat of footsteps that once echoed above my bed. Those echoes were now part of the cottage's soul, a timeless dance between the seen and unseen. In the end, the story of the footsteps above was not one of fear or haunting, but of connection and remembrance. It was about a young girl named Annie, whose spirit lingered in love and light. It was about a home that held onto its history with gentle care, welcoming those who came after. And it was about me, a stranger who became part of that story, carrying forward the legacy of life and memory. The footsteps above may have faded into the past, but their rhythm continues in the heart of the cottage and in the quiet moments when the world feels full of wonder. This is where the story finds its rest, a chapter closed with grace and peace, a tale of footsteps, laughter, and the enduring bond between past and present. And as the seasons turn and the cottage stands under the wide Devon sky, I know that the stories it holds will live on, whispered softly in the breeze and carried in the hearts of those who listen.